The night Liam Mercer climbed that fence behind the Steelhawks clubhouse, he had no idea his sister had less than 6 months to live. Nobody did. Not the doctors who smiled with their rehearsed sympathy, not the social workers who brought donated wheelchairs that reeked of someone else's surrender, and certainly not the 14-year-old kid stealing motorcycle parts in the freezing November dark, believing he could somehow build his way out of fate itself. But the bikers knew. One look at Ava's hollow cheeks and rattling breath told them everything the boy refused to see. And in that moment, 50 dangerous men made a choice that would either save 2 broken kids or destroy them both. Stay with us until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. You're not going to believe where this goes. The first snow of November came down like ash over the industrial east side of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. A dying steel town where hope went to rust, and the only thing people still manufactured was regret. Liam Mercer moved through the alley behind the Steelhawks clubhouse with trembling hands and survival burning in his chest, each breath visible in the freezing air, each footstep deliberate across gravel that crunched too loud beneath sneakers, held together with duct tape and desperation. He shouldn't have been there. The chain-link fence groaned under his weight as he climbed, skinny frame folding over the top before dropping into the biker junkyard where forgotten Harleys sat gutted beneath tarps and broken neon signs flickered their last pathetic light into the darkness. 14 years old and already moving like someone being chased by something bigger than cops. His backpack hung crooked across one shoulder, stuffed with tools he'd found in dumpsters, and a determination so fierce it scared him. Inside that bag, one rusted wrench, a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in gas station napkins, a folded photograph of his sister, and the kind of hope that only exists in kids who haven't learned better yet. Liam crouched beside a pile of discarded motorcycle parts, corroded cables, bent sprockets, pieces of chrome that still caught moonlight, like they remembered what beauty felt like. His fingers worked fast, sorting through the junk with the focused intensity of someone who'd been planning this for weeks. Every bolt mattered. Every scrap of metal represented something bigger than itself. Because back home in their mother's basement apartment, his 13-year-old sister Ava sat trapped inside a secondhand wheelchair that squeaked when it moved and smelled like mildew and the particular shame of accepting charity from strangers who meant well but never looked you in the eye. The social worker had delivered it 6 months ago with a smile that didn't reach her exhausted face, and Ava had cried silently for 2 hours while Liam watched through the doorway, feeling something inside him crack open that would never fully close again. He'd promised her something different that night, something faster, something that didn't announce her limitations before she even entered a room, something free. The motion sensor light exploded overhead like a searchlight in a prison break. Liam froze, heart slamming against his ribs, still crouched beside the parts pile with a motorcycle cable in one hand and sudden terror flooding his system. For 3 seconds, the world held its breath. Just the buzzing light, the distant highway traffic, and the horrible certainty that he'd just destroyed everything. Then boots hit gravel behind him. Heavy, deliberate, moving with the confidence of someone who'd caught 1,000 trespassers and knew exactly how this ended. "Don't run," a voice said from the darkness. Male, flat, the kind of tone that suggested running would be the worst decision Liam ever made. "Hands where I can see them, now." Liam stood slowly, arms rising, the motorcycle cable still clutched in his white-knuckled grip like a lifeline he couldn't force himself to release. He turned toward the voice and saw a man stepping into the pool of fluorescent light, mid-20s, leather cut over a flannel shirt, steel hawk's patch visible across his back, and eyes that had already decided Liam was just another punk kid stealing shit to sell for drug money. Nick Rayner, club prospect, 3 months away from earning his full patch and willing to prove his loyalty through violence if necessary. "Drop it," Nick said, nodding toward the cable. "Then empty the bag. Slow." Liam's throat closed. He couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything except stand there in the freezing November dark with snow dusting his shoulders and the weight of his sister's dying hope crushing his chest. Nick took another step forward. "I said drop it." The cable hit the gravel with a metallic clatter that sounded like surrender. Liam swung the backpack off his shoulder and held it out, hands shaking so badly the zipper rattled. Nick snatched it, dumped the contents onto the ground between them, tools spilling out first, then the photograph fluttering down like a falling leaf, and finally the sandwich tumbling out still wrapped in its gas station napkins, landing in the dirt beside carefully selected motorcycle components that suddenly looked like evidence of something more complicated than theft. Nick stared at the pile, then at Liam, then back at the pile. "The fuck is this?" Liam's voice came out smaller than he wanted. "Please. I wasn't stealing to sell them. I was—" He stopped. Started again. "My sister, Your sister needs you to rob bikers?" Nick's hand moved toward his belt. "That your story?" "She needs a ride." The words burst out of Liam like a confession he'd been holding back for months. "A real one. Not that fucking wheelchair that makes her feel like everyone's looking at her with pity. Something fast. Something that lets her move like she's not broken." The silence that followed hit harder than violence ever could. Nick's hand stopped moving toward his belt. His eyes stayed locked on Liam's face, searching for the lie, waiting for the angle, trying to figure out what kind of scam this skinny kid was running and how much it would hurt to call it out. But Liam just stood there shaking in the cold with snow melting in his hair, and that photograph of his sister lying face up in the dirt, a picture from before the diagnosis, when Ava still smiled like someone who believed the world might let her keep that joy forever. From the garage doorway across the junkyard, a figure stepped into view. Mac Delaney. 63 years old, road-worn and silent, with hands scarred from decades of welding and grief, buried so deep behind steel-gray eyes that most people never saw it until it was too late. He'd been watching from the shadows the entire time, leaning against the doorframe with a cigarette burning between his fingers, and something inside his chest recognizing the particular shape of this kid's desperation. He'd seen it before, in himself. 30 years ago, when his own daughter had needed something he couldn't buy and couldn't steal and couldn't fix with his hands, no matter how hard he tried. "Bring him inside," Mac said quietly. Not to Nick, to the night itself. "Kid's freezing." Nick turned, confused. "Mac, he was stealing. I know what he was doing." Mac flicked his cigarette into the snow. "Bring him inside anyway." The Steelhawks clubhouse looked like the kind of place decent people crossed the street to avoid. Cinder block walls painted black, small barred windows, a heavy steel door marked with spray-painted graffiti that had been there so long it qualified as historical. Inside, oil-stained concrete floors, hanging chains, workbenches cluttered with tools and beer bottles, and the constant low rumble of idling Harleys that made the entire space vibrate like something alive and waiting. Liam stood just inside the doorway, arms wrapped around himself, trying not to look at the bikers scattered throughout the garage who'd stopped working to watch him with the blank curiosity of predators evaluating prey. 10 men, maybe 12, all wearing the same steel Hawks patch, all carrying the same dangerous silence that suggested they'd spent time in places where silence meant survival. Mac pulled out a metal folding chair, gestured for Liam to sit. "Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out." So Liam talked. He told them about Ava, about the diagnosis that came 3 months after their mother disappeared north with a long-haul trucker and never called back, about the pediatric neurologist who used words like degenerative and progressive and limited mobility while staring at a computer screen instead of looking Ava in her terrified 13-year-old eyes. He told them about the wheelchair, the physical therapy that insurance wouldn't cover, the social worker who kept saying adaptive equipment like those words could somehow replace the life his sister used to have. He told them about the promise he'd made in the dark, that he'd build her something different, something that moved, something that let her fly. And he told them he had no idea how to actually do it. "I've been watching YouTube videos," Liam said quietly, staring at his hands. "Learning about motors and batteries and frame geometry. I figured if I could just get the parts, I could—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I could figure it out." The garage stayed silent except for the ticking of cooling engines and the distant traffic on Route 7. Max studied the kid with eyes that had seen 1,000 broken things and learned to recognize which ones could still be saved. He saw the duct-taped shoes, the too thin frame, the exhaustion pressed so deep into this boy's face that it looked permanent. "How old are you?" Mac asked. 14. Where's your father? Gone. Liam's voice went flat. Mom, too. It's just us now. Another biker stepped forward from the shadows. Trigger, 47 years old, missing his left leg below the knee from a racing accident in 2003, and carrying the kind of hard-earned wisdom that only comes from learning how to rebuild yourself after the world breaks you in half. What's your sister's name? Trigger asked. Ava. Ava need a scooter or a wheelchair conversion? Liam looked up, confused by the specificity of the question. I don't know. Something that moves fast, something she can control herself without needing anyone to push her. Trigger nodded slowly, then turned to Mac. Mini bike frame, electric motor, custom seat with back support and safety restraints. Could work? Could work, Mac agreed, then looked back at Liam. You willing to put in the hours? Learn to weld? Take instruction without bitching? Liam's heart kicked against his ribs. You're going to help me? We're going to teach you to help yourself, Mac corrected. Big difference. You want this done, you're building it. We'll provide tools, parts, and knowledge. But the sweat? That's on you. Something inside Liam's chest cracked open, not breaking, but blooming, like a door he'd thought was locked forever suddenly swinging wide. When do we start? Mac ground out his cigarette with his boot. Right now. The next 4 weeks rewired Liam's understanding of the world. He showed up at the Steelhawks clubhouse every day after school, 3:47 p.m. like clockwork, and stayed until Mac kicked him out around midnight, exhausted and covered in grease and welding slag, but learning more about metal, motors, and survival than any classroom had ever taught him. Mac became his primary instructor, teaching him to read blueprints, measure twice, and cut once, and understand that precision mattered more than speed. Under the old biker's scarred hands, Liam learned to weld, starting with simple joints, graduating to complex angles, eventually creating seams so clean they looked machine-made. Welding's not about force, Mac said one night, demonstrating a vertical bead while sparks burst like fireworks in the darkness. It's about patience and respect. Metal tells you what it needs. Your job is to listen. Nick handled the electrical work, wiring the battery pack, installing the motor controller, running lights and a horn that Ava could reach without straining. The young prospect had stopped looking at Liam like a criminal and started treating him like a little brother, which somehow felt more dangerous because it meant Liam had something to lose now. Trigger donated an old mini-bike frame from his racing days. Aluminum, lightweight, built for speed. He spent hours with Liam discussing weight distribution, center of gravity, and how to modify the seat so Ava could ride safely without feeling restricted. Freedom and safety aren't opposites, Trigger said, adjusting the frame angles with a level. They're partners. You give her one without the other, you've failed her. Other bikers drifted in and out of the project like guardian angels who'd forgotten they were supposed to be demons. Parts appeared on the workbench without explanation, donated from forgotten bikes and broken dreams that these men had been carrying around for decades, waiting for a reason to believe in something again. A throttle assembly from Wrench's 84 Softail. Grips from Spider's first Harley. A chrome headlight from a bike that Mama Jean's late husband had ridden before cancer took him in 2019. Nobody said much. The Steelhawks weren't built for sentimental speeches or emotional revelations, but every donated part carried weight that had nothing to do with metal and everything to do with the silent language of men who'd spent their lives proving the world wrong about who they really were. Mama Jean ran the clubhouse kitchen, 61 years old, gray hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, and a gaze that could strip paint off a gas tank. She'd been around the Steelhawks since 1987, back when they were still running guns across state lines and pretending they weren't terrified of federal prison. She found Liam one night around 9 p.m., hunched over the workbench with a soldering iron, trying to connect wiring harnesses by watching a YouTube tutorial on his cracked phone screen. "You eat today?" she asked. Liam didn't look up. "Yeah." "Liar?" She dropped a plate beside him. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a roll still warm from the oven. Real food. The kind that came from someone who gave a shit whether you survived or not. Liam stared at the plate like it might disappear if he moved too fast. "I can't pay you." "Did I ask for money?" "No, but..." "Then shut up and eat before it gets cold." 3 weeks into the build, Mama Jean emptied an entire envelope onto the workbench. Cash from years of poker-run fundraisers that the club had been saving for new security cameras. $4,700 in mixed bills, rubber-banded and waiting. "Buy your sister proper batteries," Mama Jean said. "The good lithium ones. Not some cheap shit that'll catch fire after 6 months." Liam tried to argue. Mama Jean shut him down with a look that suggested arguing was the dumbest thing he could possibly do. "Build the girl something worth remembering," she said. Then walked away before Liam could say thank you, because gratitude made her uncomfortable, and she'd already decided this kid deserved better than her emotional limitations. The scooter slowly took shape like a promise being kept one weld at a time. Matte black powder-coated frame, chrome handlebars with custom grips, a seat upholstered in black leather with red stitching that Mama Jean sewed herself during late-night shifts when sleep wouldn't come. The electric motor hummed with restrained power, capable of hitting 28 miles per hour, which felt like flying for someone who'd spent the last year moving 3 miles per hour in a squeaking wheelchair. Jinx, the club's resident artist, and a woman who'd survived 2 abusive marriages before finding family among the Steelhawks, hand-painted blood-red flames along the body panels, designed to look like they were racing backward, like Ava was moving so fast the fire couldn't keep up. "Your sister got a favorite color?" Jinx asked one afternoon, stirring paint with methodical precision. "Red," Liam said. "She used to have this red jacket before—" He stopped. Started again. "Before we had to sell it." Jinx nodded once, then spent the next 6 hours making sure those flames looked perfect, because some things mattered too much to rush. Late one Thursday in early December, Mac finally asked the question he'd been avoiding for a month. "When's your sister coming to see this?" Liam went very still, hands frozen over the battery pack he'd been testing. "I wanted to wait until it was finished." "That's not what I asked." Silence. Then, "She doesn't know I'm building it." Mac set down his welding torch. "Explain." "If I tell her and I can't finish it," Liam's voice cracked. "If something goes wrong or I fuck it up or we run out of parts, I don't want her hoping for something that never comes. Better she doesn't know until it's real." Mac studied the kid's face and saw fear buried so deep it had become architecture. "You think you're protecting her." "I know I am." "No." Mac's voice went flat. "You're protecting yourself. You're scared that if she sees you trying and failing, she'll lose faith in you. But here's what you're actually teaching her, that the people who love her will hide the truth to avoid their own discomfort." The words hit like a fist to the sternum. Liam turned away, jaw clenched, blinking hard against something that felt dangerously close to tears. "You don't understand." "I understand better than you think." Mac's voice softened just slightly. "My daughter stopped talking to me 12 years ago because I kept secrets to protect her. Know what I learned? Secrets feel like safety until they become walls." He let that sit for a moment. Then, "Bring Ava here this weekend. Let her see what you're building. Let her be part of it instead of just waiting for it." Liam wanted to argue. Wanted to explain that Mac was wrong, that this was different, that keeping the surprise was the kindest thing he could do, but something in the old biker's steel-gray eyes suggested he'd already had this argument with himself 1,000 times and lost every single round. "Okay," Liam whispered. Saturday. That Saturday, Ava came to the Steelhawks clubhouse for the first time. Liam pushed her wheelchair across the parking lot with his heart hammering against his ribs, and his sister silent beside him, taking in the rows of Harleys, the bikers smoking near the entrance, and the general atmosphere of danger that clung to this place like cologne. She was small for 13, fragile in a way that had nothing to do with the wheelchair and everything to do with the disease slowly stealing her strength from the inside out. Dark circles under her eyes, hands that trembled slightly when she wasn't concentrating, and a wariness in her expression that came from spending too many months being handled by medical professionals who touched her like she was already broken beyond repair. "You sure about this?" Ava asked quietly as they approached the entrance. "Trust me," Liam said, which was both a lie and the only true thing he'd ever told her. The clubhouse door opened before they reached it. Mac stood in the doorway, backlit by fluorescent garage light, looking exactly like the kind of dangerous man parents warned their kids about. But he didn't move aside or speak or do anything except meet Ava's eyes with a directness that suggested he saw past the wheelchair to the person beneath. "You must be Ava," Max said. She nodded once, unsure whether to be terrified or curious. "Your brother talks about you constantly." Max stepped aside, holding the door. "Come see what he's building." The garage fell silent when they entered. 12 bikers stood scattered throughout the space, some holding tools, others leaning against workbenches, all watching this small girl in her squeaking wheelchair roll across oil-stained concrete with her wide eyes taking in everything at once. Ava saw the unfinished scooter immediately. It sat on the center workbench beneath hanging lights, matte black frame gleaming, chrome bars catching fluorescent reflections. Those blood-red flames painted along the side panels looking like speed frozen in metal. Incomplete, but already beautiful. Already promising something bigger than itself. She stopped breathing for 3 full seconds. "Liam?" Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. What is that?" "It's yours." Liam crouched beside her wheelchair, hands shaking. "I've been working on it for a month. It's not done yet. But I wanted you to see it, to know that you're not stuck, that you're going to fly." Ava stared at the scooter like it might vanish if she looked away. Then she started crying. Not sad tears, but something more complicated, something that sounded like relief and disbelief and hope all tangled together in her chest where they'd been fighting for space. Trigger rolled forward on his prosthetic leg, moving with the easy confidence of someone who'd rebuilt himself after the world said he was finished. He crouched beside Ava's chair at eye level, meeting her gaze with the kind of directness that didn't allow for bullshit or pity. "You don't wait for life to hand freedom back," he told her quietly. "You take it, you build it, you fight for it every single day until it becomes real." Ava wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't know how." "That's why we're going to teach you." Trigger stood, gestured toward the scooter. "Starting now." For the next hour, Ava became part of the build. Mama Jean showed her how to read torque specifications and explained why precision mattered more than speed. Jinx let her add small paint details to the flame design, tiny sparks at the edges that suggested fire barely contained. Nick walked her through the electrical system, pointing out every wire and connection so she understood exactly how this machine would move. And Mac, silent, careful Mac, taught her how to sit on the partially assembled frame, how to grip the handlebars, how to imagine herself moving fast enough that the wind tore tears from her eyes, and the world became nothing but speed and freedom. "You're not riding behind people anymore," Mac said softly, adjusting the handlebar angles. "You're leading. You understand the difference?" Ava nodded, hands still gripping the chrome bars like they were the only solid thing in her universe. For the first time in a year, she smiled like someone opening a locked door from the inside. The Steel Hawks had found their purpose again, and they would kill to protect it. 3 days later, everything changed when Club President Kane Mercer finally stepped into the garage. 6'4", 240 pounds of muscle and scar tissue, with knuckles that looked like they'd been broken and reset wrong, and a voice like gravel being dragged across concrete. Kane had been running the Steel Hawks for 7 years, through federal investigations, rival club conflicts, and the slow death of outlaw culture under surveillance capitalism and gentrification. He didn't show up at the clubhouse often anymore, too busy managing legitimate business interests and keeping the club's criminal past buried deep enough that it couldn't surface during parole hearings. But he'd heard about the kid, about the project, about Mac turning the garage into some kind of charity workshop for broken children. Kane stood in the doorway wearing his leather, cut over a black thermal shirt, arms crossed, watching Liam weld a support bracket while Ava sat nearby offering commentary. The scene looked almost domestic, peaceful. It made him irrationally angry. "Mac," Kane said flatly. "Outside. Now." The garage went silent except for the hiss of Liam's welding torch cutting off mid-bead. Mac set down his tools, wiped his hands on a rag, and followed Kane into the cold December air without a word. They walked 20 feet from the entrance before Kane turned and unleashed everything he'd been holding back. "What the fuck are you doing?" Kane's voice stayed low but carried edge like a blade being sharpened. "We're not a goddamn community center. We're not social workers. We don't babysit kids and build them custom rides like we're fucking Santa Claus. Mac lit a cigarette, took a long drag, let the silence stretch. Kid needed help. And that's our problem because we're not monsters. Mac met Kane's eyes without flinching. Or did you forget that somewhere between the federal raids and your legitimate business ventures? Don't lecture me about morality, Kane snapped. I've kept this club alive through shit that would have destroyed anyone else. I've made the hard calls. I've protected this brotherhood when nobody else would. And now you're risking everything we've built for some kid you don't even know? His sister's dying. The words landed like a physical blow. Kane stopped mid-breath, something behind his eyes flickering, not quite sympathy, but close enough to recognize. What? Ava. The girl in the wheelchair. She's got degenerative something. Medical terminology doesn't matter. Point is, she's got maybe 6 months before that chair becomes permanent, and another year after that before she stops being able to leave her bed. Mac took another drag. Kid's building her a last chance at freedom. You really want to shut that down? Kane stared at the clubhouse door, jaw working, hands curling into fists and releasing in a rhythm that suggested he was fighting something bigger than anger. That's not fair. Life rarely is. I have responsibilities, Mac, to this club, to the brothers, to... He stopped. Started again. I can't let personal shit cloud my judgment. Personal shit? Mac's voice went sharp. You mean like your daughter, Emma? The one who stopped talking to you 3 years ago because you chose the club over her graduation, her birthday, her life? Don't. Kane's voice dropped to something dangerous. Don't go there. I'm already there. You've been there every single day since she walked away, wondering if you made the right choice, knowing you didn't, and doing nothing about it because admitting you were wrong would mean admitting you're not the unbreakable president everyone thinks you are. Kane's fist hit the cinder block wall hard enough to split his knuckles. Blood welled up, dark against his pale skin, and he stared at it like he couldn't remember how it got there. I'm trying to protect them, he said quietly. All of them. The club. The legacy. Everything we built. By being so rigid you can't recognize family when it's staring you in the face? Mac gestured toward the garage. That kid in there? He's more loyal than half our prospects. He shows up every day. He works until he can barely stand. He's learning skills that'll carry him through life. And his sister? She's learning that dangerous men can also be guardians, that outlaws aren't always villains. Mac let that sit for a beat. Then, you want to protect your legacy? Start by remembering what it was supposed to mean. Kane stood silent in the cold December air, bleeding and furious, and somewhere beneath all that armor, terrified. Finally, he pulled out his phone, scrolled through photos until he found the one he'd been avoiding for months. Emma, his daughter. 21 years old, standing in front of her college dorm, smiling like someone who'd learned to be happy without him. He showed Mac the photo without saying anything. Mac looked, nodded. She looks good. She thinks I'm the villain in her story, Kane said quietly. And maybe she's right. Or maybe you stop being the villain by doing something worth remembering. Mac crushed his cigarette under his boot. Your call, Press. But make it fast because the kid's almost done building the scooter, and if you're going to shut this down, do it now before they get attached. Kane stared at the photo for another long moment. Then he pocketed his phone, wiped blood off his knuckles with his shirt, and walked back toward the clubhouse with his jaw set and something that might have been determination burning behind his eyes. He stepped through the doorway and surveyed the scene. Liam at the workbench, Ava watching from her chair, Mac and Trigger and Nick and Mama Jean all frozen mid-task, waiting to see how this was going to end. Kane's voice, when it came, sounded like gravel being crushed under tires. How much will it cost to finish this properly? Not half-assed, not budget, the real number. Liam looked up, confused and terrified. I don't... Custom chrome, Kane continued, ignoring him. Upgraded battery pack with extended range, LED lighting, safety features, a paint job that makes every other scooter on the road look like a fucking toy. How much? Mac answered carefully. 8 grand, maybe 9. Kane reached into his jacket, pulled out a thick envelope, and dropped it onto the workbench beside the unfinished scooter. Cash. more than Liam had ever seen in one place, enough to finish the build 3 times over. "Make it impossible to ignore," Kane said, then turned to Ava, crouched slowly so he was at eye level with her chair, and spoke with a gentleness that didn't match anything about his appearance. "My daughter stopped talking to me because I forgot how to see people instead of problems. Don't let your brother make the same mistake. He's building you freedom, but you're building him purpose. That's worth protecting." Ava stared at this massive, scarred man who looked like violence personified but spoke like someone who understood exactly what it meant to lose the people you loved through your own failures. "Thank you," she whispered. Kane stood, nodded once to Mac, and walked out without another word, leaving behind an envelope full of cash and the distinct impression that something fundamental had just shifted inside the Steelhawks Brotherhood. Mac picked up the envelope, weighed it in his hand, then looked at Liam with something that might have been pride. "You heard the man. Make it impossible to ignore." The build accelerated after that night, fueled by Kane's money and something more volatile, the entire club's desperate need to prove they were still capable of creating instead of just surviving. Ava started coming to the clubhouse every day after school, doing homework at a corner table while the bikers worked and swore and told stories that were probably too rough for a 13-year-old, but taught her more about loyalty than any sanitized after-school special ever could. She learned torque specifications from Mama Jean, painted intricate details with Jinx, helped Nick troubleshoot electrical connections when the motor controller acted finicky, and spent long evenings beside Mac's workbench, watching him weld with the kind of focus that made the entire world disappear except for metal and heat and the promise of creation. "Why are you helping us?" Ava asked him one night when the clubhouse had emptied out and it was just the two of them beneath fluorescent lights. Mac kept welding, sparks cascading across the concrete floor. "Because I know what it's like to watch someone you love slip away while you stand there helpless." He finished the bead, flipped up his helmet, met her eyes. "And because I know what it's like to spend years wishing you'd done something different when you still had the chance." Ava absorbed that quietly. Then, "Did your person die?" "No. Worse. She stopped believing I could change." Max set down the torch. "My daughter, Emma. Different Emma, not Kane's daughter. Mine walked away because I chose the club over her too many times, and by the time I realized what I'd lost, she'd already built a life that didn't include me. Do you regret it?" "Every single day." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind that only exists between people who've both learned that some wounds don't heal, they just become part of your architecture. "I'm not going to slip away," Ava said finally. "The doctors say I might have years." Mac looked at her with eyes that had seen too many people make promises their bodies couldn't keep. But he didn't argue, didn't correct her. Just nodded once and went back to welding, because some lies are kinder than truth. Late that night, after Ava had gone home and the clubhouse had emptied except for Mac and the cooling engines, Kane returned. He stood in the garage doorway for a long moment, watching Mac clean welding equipment with methodical precision. Finally, "I called Emma tonight." Mac's hand stopped moving. "You're Emma?" "Yeah." Kane stepped inside, hands shoved in his pockets. "First time in 8 months. Left a voicemail saying I was sorry for being the kind of father who always chose duty over presence. Said I was trying to learn how to be different." "She call back?" "Not yet." Kane moved to the workbench, studied the almost finished scooter. "But she will, or she won't. Either way, I said the thing I should have said years ago." Mac nodded slowly. "That's more than most men manage." "I saw Ava's medical records," Kane said quietly, and Mac went very still. Nick pulled them through his contact at County General, the neurologist's notes, the prognosis. He paused. "Mac, she's not getting better. The scooter's not going to save her." "I know." "Then why?" "Because saving her was never the point." Mac set down the torch, turned to face Kane directly. "The point is giving her something worth remembering, showing her that dangerous men can also build beautiful things, proving to her brother that hope isn't always stupid." He let that settle. Then, "And maybe proving to ourselves that we're more than the mistakes we've spent decades trying to outrun." Kane stared at the scooter for another long moment, at the matte black paint, the blood-red flames, the chrome gleaming under garage lights, at the physical manifestation of everything the Steelhawks were supposed to be, but had forgotten somewhere between federal raids and survival. "Finish it fast," Kane said finally. "Whatever she's got left, make sure she gets to use this thing while she still can." Then he walked out into the December cold, leaving Mac alone with his tools and the weight of knowing that some promises have expiration dates you can't negotiate. The scooter was finished 3 days before Christmas. They gathered in the garage on a Thursday night, the entire Steelhawks brotherhood standing in a silent circle around the workbench, like mourners at a funeral that hadn't happened yet. Except they weren't mourning. They were witnessing. Liam stepped forward with shaking hands and pulled away the white cloth covering his sister's finished ride. Matte black frame with blood-red flames that looked like speed frozen mid-motion. Chrome handlebars polished to mirror brightness. Custom leather seats stitched with Ava's name in crimson thread. LED headlight, powerful enough to cut through the darkest night. Battery pack capable of 40 miles on a single charge, and a top speed that would make her feel like she was flying, not a wheelchair, a declaration. "It's perfect," Liam whispered, and his voice cracked on the second word. Mac gripped his shoulder. "You built that. Every weld, every bolt, every decision. Don't forget that when things get hard." They decided to surprise Ava with the reveal on Saturday, Christmas weekend, when the roads would be empty and the entire club could ride together. Liam wanted to tell her immediately, but Mac convinced him to wait, to give her one more perfect surprise before reality reasserted itself. "Let her have the moment," Mac said. "The pure, unfiltered joy before she starts worrying about how long it'll last. She deserves that." So they waited. And on Saturday morning, December 21st, beneath a cold blue sky that looked like it had been scrubbed clean by winter wind, 50 Steelhawks gathered outside the clubhouse wearing their leather cuts and carrying the kind of dangerous solidarity that made ordinary citizens nervous. Inside, Ava sat in her wheelchair with no idea what was coming. Liam pushed her toward the garage door with his heart trying to escape through his throat. "I have something to show you." "Is it the scooter?" Ava's voice carried hope, wrapped in caution. "Is it done?" "See for yourself." Mac opened the door, and there it sat in the center of the garage, spotlighted by every fluorescent fixture, gleaming like a promise someone had finally decided to keep. 50 bikers stood around it in a silent honor guard, their faces showing nothing but the fierce pride of men who'd remembered what they were supposed to be. Ava took one look and burst into tears. Not delicate crying, not quiet or controlled. Full-body sobs that shook her thin frame and made every biker in the room simultaneously want to comfort her and disappear, because none of them knew how to handle this kind of raw emotion without their armor cracking. "It's yours," Liam said, voice breaking. "Every piece, every weld, it's fast and it's safe, and it's going to take you anywhere you want to go." Mama Jean crouched beside Ava's wheelchair, produced a tissue from somewhere, and handed it over without speaking. Sometimes the best comfort is just witnessing someone else's joy without trying to manage it. When Ava finally stopped crying long enough to breathe, she looked at the scooter with an expression that suggested she was trying to memorize every detail before it could vanish like everything else good in her life. Can I try it?" she asked. "That's why we're here," Mac said. They lifted her carefully from the wheelchair onto the custom seat. Trigger and Nick working together with the kind of practiced gentleness that suggested they'd done this before, in other contexts, for other broken people who needed carrying. Ava's hands found the handlebars, gripped chrome with white-knuckled intensity, and suddenly she wasn't a sick kid anymore. She was a rider. Mac showed her the controls, throttle on the right grip, brake on the left, horn button near her thumb. "Start slow. The motor's got power, so respect it. And remember, freedom and safety aren't opposites." Ava nodded once, then twisted the throttle. The electric motor hummed to life with a sound like contained thunder, and the scooter rolled forward 2 feet before she panicked and hit the brake. Everyone froze, waiting to see if she'd give up or try again. She tried again. This time she made it 10 feet, then 20. Then across the entire length of the garage with growing confidence, her thin arms steady on the handlebars, and something that looked like joy beginning to bloom across her face. When she finally stopped and turned back to face the assembled Steelhawks, she was smiling like someone who'd just discovered they could fly. Can we Her voice caught. "Can we take it outside?" Kane stepped forward from the back of the crowd, leather cut hanging from his massive frame, and for the first time since entering the garage, his face showed something other than dangerous control. "We're not just taking it outside," he said. "We're leading you down Main Street at the front of 50 Harleys, so the entire town knows exactly who you are." Ava stared at him, uncomprehending. "But I can't." "You can," Kane interrupted gently, "and you will, because that's what Steelhawks do. We ride together, we protect our own, and we make damn sure the world knows not to underestimate the people we love." Outside, engines roared to life like a thunderstorm announcing itself. 50 Harleys firing up in unison, their combined rumble shaking the clubhouse walls and rattling windows 3 blocks away. Ava rolled through the open garage door onto the winter-cold asphalt, stopped at the front of the assembled motorcycles, and looked back at her brother with eyes that asked 1,000 questions she couldn't quite voice. Liam walked up beside her scooter, crouched down, and spoke so only she could hear. "You're not broken. You never were. Now prove it." The Steelhawks fell into formation. Ava at the front, 50 bikers flanking her sides and trailing behind, Mac riding directly to her left, and Kane to her right like guardian angels who'd forgotten they were supposed to be demons. "Ready?" Mac called over the engine noise. Ava twisted the throttle, and suddenly she was flying, electric motors singing beneath her, wind tearing through her hair, the entire world shrinking down to nothing but speed, and the roar of 50 motorcycles following her lead down Main Street through the heart of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. People stopped on sidewalks. Cars pulled over. Strangers held up phones to film this impossible sight. A 13-year-old girl leading a biker procession like she'd been born to it, moving faster than anyone thought she could, riding at the head of a brotherhood that had decided she was worth protecting. The Steelhawks weren't leading her. They were following. And in that moment, everything Mac had told Kane came true. This wasn't about saving Ava. It was about showing her that freedom was still possible. That hope wasn't always stupid. That dangerous men could also be guardians. Ava's laughter cut through the engine noise, pure, unfiltered joy that made every biker in the procession simultaneously want to protect her forever and also understand that she didn't need protecting anymore. She needed witnessing. And 50 outlaws bore witness to a miracle they'd helped create with scarred hands and buried grief and the desperate need to prove they were more than their worst mistakes. But miracles have a cost. And 3 blocks ahead, waiting at the intersection of Main and 7th, something was about to go terribly, brutally wrong. The SUV came out of nowhere. Black Escalade running the red light at 7th and Main doing 45 in a 25 zone. Driver's face hidden behind tinted windows and zero intention of stopping. The moment stretched like taffy. Ava rolling through the intersection on her scooter with 50 Harleys behind her, the SUV's engine roaring as it barreled toward her, and every single Steelhawk simultaneously realizing they were too far back to reach her in time. Max screamed her name, but the word got swallowed by wind and engine noise. Kane swerved his Harley hard left, trying to cut between Ava and the vehicle. And Ava, 13 years old, riding free for the first time in her life, looked right and saw death coming for her in the form of 3 tons of luxury steel that wasn't going to stop. She twisted the throttle. The electric motor screamed in protest as Ava launched forward with acceleration that probably would have killed the battery's long-term health, but didn't matter because long-term was a luxury she might not have anyway. The scooter shot through the intersection 3 feet ahead of the Escalade's front bumper, chrome gleaming in winter sunlight, blood-red flames blurring into motion, and Ava's thin arms locked rigid on the handlebars, while her heart tried to explode through her chest. The SUV missed her by inches, blew through the intersection without even tapping the brakes, disappeared down 7th Street like it had never been there at all. 50 motorcycles skidded to chaotic stops in the middle of the road, riders dismounting, shouting, some pulling phones to call the cops, while others checked on Ava, who'd rolled to a trembling halt on the far side of the intersection, with her hands still death-gripped on the handlebars, and her breath coming in ragged gasps that sounded like someone drowning on dry land. Mac reached her first, boots hitting pavement before his Harley even finished rocking to a stop. "Ava, look at me. You hurt?" She shook her head but couldn't speak. couldn't do anything except sit there shaking while her brother sprinted across the intersection with terror written across his 14-year-old face, and the rest of the Steelhawks formed a protective circle around her like they could somehow shield her from what had already almost happened. "Did anyone get the plates?" Kane's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Somebody tell me they got the fucking plates." Nick held up his phone. "Partial. Last 3 digits. Running it now through my guy at county." "It wasn't an accident," Trigger said quietly, and every head turned toward him. That SUV accelerated into the intersection. Whoever was driving aimed for her. The words landed like gasoline on fire. "Aimed?" Liam's voice cracked. "What do you mean aimed? Who would? Why would?" "We don't know yet," Max said, hands still on Ava's shoulders, feeling her shake beneath his palms. "But we're going to find out." Kane pulled out his phone, stepped away from the group, and made 3 calls in rapid succession, each one quieter than the last, each one ending with a clipped "handle it" that suggested things were being set in motion that couldn't be unmade. When he returned, his face looked like carved granite. "We're moving. Now, back to the clubhouse. Nobody rides alone. Ava in the middle, surrounded. If that SUV comes back, we make sure it can't reach her." They reformed the procession, but everything felt different now. The joy from 10 minutes ago had evaporated, replaced by the cold tactical awareness of men who'd spent years learning how to protect what mattered, while expecting the world to try stealing it anyway. Ava rolled back toward the clubhouse, flanked by bikers who kept scanning intersections, checking mirrors, watching for threats that might materialize from nowhere the way that Escalade had. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just gripped the handlebars and kept moving forward because stopping felt more dangerous than continuing. When they finally pulled into the clubhouse parking lot, Liam practically dragged her off the scooter and into the garage where the fluorescent lights felt too bright and the concrete walls felt too thin to keep out whatever was coming. "We need to call the police," Liam said, voice rising. "File a report. Get protection." "No cops." Kane's tone left zero room for argument. "Not yet." "Not yet? Someone just tried to kill my sister and you want to, what, handle it internally?" Liam's hands curled into fists. "This isn't some club business you can solve with intimidation and loyalty. This is attempted murder." "Which is exactly why we can't involve cops yet." Kane moved closer, voice dropping to something that carried weight without volume. "You bring in police, they start asking questions. They dig into backgrounds. They look at everyone associated with this club, and suddenly we're all suspects instead of protectors." "I don't care about your club's past," Liam shot back. "I care about keeping Ava alive." "So do we." Max stepped between them before the argument could escalate further. "Which is why we need to figure out who's targeting her before we bring in authorities who might make things worse." Ava's quiet voice cut through the tension. "Maybe it was just an accident." Every biker in the garage turned to look at her. "Maybe the driver was texting or drunk or just didn't see the light," she continued, but her voice carried the hollow conviction of someone trying to convince herself of a lie. "Maybe it wasn't about me at all." Trigger crouched beside her wheelchair. They'd brought it along in Nick's truck just in case, and met her eyes with the kind of directness that didn't allow for comfortable delusions. "You don't believe that." "I want to believe it." "Wanting doesn't make it true." He straightened, turned to address the room. That SUV targeted her specifically. Timing was too precise. Angle was deliberate. Whoever was driving knew exactly what they were doing. "Which brings us back to the question nobody wants to ask," Nick said from his position near the workbench. "Who wants to hurt a 13-year-old girl in a custom mobility scooter? What's the motive?" Silence settled over the garage like smoke from a fire nobody could see yet. Finally, Mama Jean spoke up from the kitchen doorway where she'd been watching with her arms crossed, and her face carrying the kind of concern that came from decades of seeing men make stupid decisions in the name of protection. "Maybe it's not about her specifically. Maybe it's about sending a message to someone else." "To who?" Liam asked. Mama Jean's eyes moved to Kane. "To us." The implication hung there like a noose waiting to drop. Kane's jaw worked, his scarred knuckles flexed, and something behind his steel-gray eyes suggested he'd already considered this possibility and reached conclusions he wasn't ready to share yet. "Everyone out," Kane said quietly. except Mac, Trigger, and Nick. Everyone else goes home, stays alert, and waits for my call. The garage emptied slowly, bikers filing out with backward glances and unspoken questions that would fester into speculation by morning. Jinx squeezed Ava's shoulder before leaving. Spider offered Liam a nod that carried more solidarity than words. Mama Jean lingered longest, studying Kane's face with eyes that had known him since 1987 and could read the fault lines in his armor better than anyone. "Don't do something stupid," she told him. "Too late for that," Kane replied. "I've been doing stupid for 20 years. When only the core group remained, Kane, Mac, Trigger, Nick, plus Liam and Ava, who refused to leave, Kane finally spoke the truth he'd been avoiding. 3 weeks ago, I made a decision. His voice stayed flat but carried undertones of something that might have been regret. Federal prosecutor named Daniels wanted information on a rival club's gun trafficking operation. Said if I cooperated, they'd clear the Steelhawks' past sins from the record. Make us legitimate. No more parole violations hanging over our heads. No more looking over our shoulders. Mac went very still. What did you give them? Names, locations, shipment schedules. Kane met his eyes. Everything they needed to bring down the Iron Jackals once and for all. The silence that followed felt like the moment before a car crash when you know impact is inevitable but haven't felt the pain yet. You set up the Jackals, Trigger said slowly, like he was testing the words to see if they made sense. Without telling the club, without taking a vote. I made an executive decision to protect this brotherhood's future. By betraying another club, Nick's voice went sharp. Jesus Christ, Kane. The Jackals might be competitors, but they're still bikers. You don't rat to the feds. That's the one line we don't cross. I crossed it to keep us alive. Kane's voice rose slightly. The Jackals were expanding into our territory. They were recruiting our prospects. They were one bad decision away from starting a war we couldn't win. So I gave the feds what they wanted and eliminated the threat without bloodshed. Without bloodshed? Mac's laugh came out bitter. You just put a target on every single person associated with this club. The Jackals find out who talked, and they will find out. They're not going to distinguish between president and civilian. They're going to burn everything we've built and everyone we care about. Liam's face had gone pale. You think the Jackals sent that SUV? I think it's a possibility we can't ignore, Kane admitted. A possibility? Liam's voice cracked. My sister almost died because of a possibility? Because you made some backroom deal with the feds and didn't bother telling anyone? I was protecting the club. Fuck the club, Liam shouted, and the words echoed through the garage like a gunshot. I don't care about your brotherhood or your territory or your past sins. I care about Ava. And you just admitted she's in danger because of your decisions. Ava reached up from her wheelchair and grabbed her brother's hand. Liam, stop. No, I won't stop. These people, he gestured wildly at the assembled bikers. They acted like family. They helped us build the scooter. They made us feel safe. But it was all bullshit, wasn't it? We were just convenient charity cases that made them feel better about themselves. And now we're collateral damage in whatever war you've started. That's not fair, Trigger said quietly. Fair? Liam turned on him. You want to talk about fair? My sister has maybe a year left before her body gives up completely. We should be spending that time making memories, not hiding from rival bikers who want revenge for something we didn't even know about. Mac moved forward, hands raised in a gesture meant to de-escalate. Nobody's hiding. We're regrouping. There's a difference. The difference is semantics. Liam's eyes were wet, but his voice stayed hard. I trusted you. Ava trusted you. We thought you were different from all the other adults who looked at us with pity and moved on. But you're just dangerous in a different way. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Mac absorbed it without flinching, because on some level he knew the kid was right. They'd pulled Liam and Ava into their world without fully explaining what that world cost. They'd offered protection without admitting that protection sometimes came with a bill nobody could afford. Kane's phone buzzed. He checked it, and his expression went darker. Nick's contact came through with the SUV info, registered to a shell company with ties to Lucas Brennan. Brennan, Mac repeated slowly. Former Iron Jackal's enforcer. Did 5 years in Leavenworth for aggravated assault. Got out 3 months ago. And he's already working, Trigger added, which means the Jackals know about Kane's cooperation and they're moving fast. Ava's small voice cut through the tactical discussion. Who's Lucas Brennan? Nobody wanted to answer. The silence stretched until finally Mac crouched beside her wheelchair and delivered the truth with the kind of gentle directness that somehow made it worse. He's someone who hurts people for money, and if he's involved, it means this isn't random. It means you've been specifically targeted as a way to hurt us. Because I'm weak, Ava said flatly. No. Mac's voice went fierce. Because you matter to us. And people like Brennan, they don't go after strength. They go after the things strong people care about most. Ava processed this quietly. Then, so I'm bait. Your family, Kane corrected. Which makes you both bait and the reason we fight. Liam pulled his sister's wheelchair back, physically putting distance between her and the bikers. We're leaving, tonight. I'll pack our stuff, and we'll disappear somewhere they can't find us. Where? Kane asked. Not mocking, genuinely curious. You're 14. No money, no ID, no resources. How far do you think you'll get before Child Services tracks you down? Or before Brennan finds you without our protection? I'll figure it out. You'll get your sister killed. Kane's words were brutal but honest. I've been running from consequences my entire life, kid. I know exactly how that story ends. You can't outrun people like Brennan. You can only face them. Or give them what they want, Liam shot back. You're the one they're after. Give yourself up. Confess to the feds that you cooperated. Draw the heat away from us. If I confess publicly, the entire Steelhawks goes down with me. Every brother who ever rode beside me becomes a suspected informant. The club disintegrates and everyone loses their protection. Kane shook his head. I won't sacrifice 50 people to save one. Even if that one is a dying child? The question hung between them like a knife waiting to fall. Kane met Liam's eyes, and for the first time since this conversation started, his armor cracked just slightly. Especially then, because dying children deserve better than learning that adults will betray their principles when things get hard. It was simultaneously the most honest and most infuriating thing he could have said. Ava spoke up again, voice stronger now. What if we draw Brennan out? Make him come to us on our terms instead of waiting for him to attack again. Everyone turned to stare at her. That's not happening, Liam said immediately. Absolutely not. You're not bait. I'm already bait, Ava countered. At least this way we control the situation. She's not wrong, Nick said slowly, and Liam's head whipped toward him with betrayal written across his face. Don't you dare agree with her, Liam warned. Listen to the plan first, Nick continued. We set up a controlled environment. Somewhere we know the terrain. Heavy surveillance, armed protection. We let Brennan think he's got an opening, and when he moves, we take him down permanently. You're talking about using my sister as bait to murder someone, Liam said flatly. How is that protecting her? It's protecting her by eliminating the threat instead of letting it chase her for the rest of her life, however long that is. Nick's voice stayed cold and tactical. Brennan won't stop after one failure. He'll keep coming, more creative, more dangerous. Eventually he'll succeed unless we remove him from the equation. Max stood and moved to the window, staring out at the parking lot where Harleys sat in neat rows under security lights. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd already walked this path and knew exactly where it led. I've seen this play out before. Different faces, same pattern. Someone threatens the club. We protect ourselves. Innocent people become collateral damage, and we tell ourselves it was necessary because the alternative was worse. He turned back to face the room. But it's never necessary. It's just the choice we make because violence is easier than vulnerability. Then what's your solution? Kane challenged. We call the cops? Hope they protect Ava better than we can? Trust the same system that's failed her since her mother abandoned her? I'm saying we give Liam and Ava a choice. Mac's eyes moved to the kids. Full disclosure this time. No surprises. We tell them exactly what staying with us means, the protection, the danger, the cost. And we let them decide whether our help is worth the risk. Kane looked like he wanted to argue, but couldn't find the angle that didn't make him sound like a dictator prioritizing control over consent. Liam pulled his sister's wheelchair closer to his body, protective and desperate. "What exactly are you offering?" "Safe house first," Max said. "Somewhere off the grid, somewhere Brennan can't find until we're ready. We move you tonight, establish protection protocols, and then we make the hard choice, run or fight." "Run means what?" Ava asked. "New city, new identities, money to start over. You disappear so completely that Brennan gives up looking." Mac's voice carried no judgment. "It's not a perfect solution, but it keeps you alive." "And fight means?" The garage went silent. Finally, Trigger answered. "Fight means we use you to draw Brennan out. Controlled environment like Nick said. Except instead of murdering him, we force a confrontation that ends with him in custody, or dead, but with us maintaining moral high ground." "Moral high ground doesn't stop bullets," Nick muttered. "No," Trigger agreed, "but it lets us sleep at night. There's value in that." Liam looked down at his sister, searching her face for direction, and found her staring back at him with eyes that had aged decades in the past hour. "If we run, we spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders," Ava said quietly. "And we lose the only people who've treated us like we matter. If we fight, you could die." "I'm dying anyway." Ava's voice didn't waver. "At least this way I get to choose how." The words hit everyone in the garage like a gut punch, because she was right. The medical prognosis hadn't changed. The degenerative disease was still stealing her strength day by day. And maybe, just maybe, going down fighting was better than fading away in a hospital bed surrounded by people who'd already given up on miracles. Liam turned to Kane and his voice came out raw. "If we do this, if we stay and fight, you make me one promise." "What?" "If something goes wrong, if Ava gets hurt because of your decisions, you don't get to walk away clean. You carry that weight for the rest of your life." Liam's 14-year-old face looked ancient. "You don't get redemption through our suffering. You understand?" Kane held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "I understand." "Then tell me the plan." They worked through the night, building a trap that looked like safety. The safe house was an old hunting cabin 40 miles outside Millbrook, owned by Mama Jean's late husband, off any official records, and isolated enough that approaching vehicles could be heard 3 minutes before arrival. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that hadn't been updated since 1994, and windows that offered clear sightlines in every direction. Mac and Trigger did the initial security sweep, checking for weaknesses, while Nick installed cameras that fed to a monitoring station in the clubhouse. Tripwires on the access road, motion sensors in the tree line, and enough weaponry stashed throughout the cabin to hold off a small army if necessary. Liam and Ava arrived just after midnight, driven in a windowless van by Spider, while 3 other bikers rode decoy routes to throw off any potential surveillance. Inside the cabin, a fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and Mama Jean had already stocked the kitchen with enough food for 2 weeks. "You don't leave this place without escort," Mac told them, setting ground rules with the clinical precision of someone who'd done this before. "You don't answer the door, you don't go near the windows after dark, and if I call with a specific code word, you hide in the basement and don't come out until I personally retrieve you." "What's the code word?" Liam asked. "Starlight." "Why Starlight?" "Because it's something Lucas Brennan would never say." Mac handed Liam a burner phone. "This is your lifeline. Memorize my number. Don't call anyone else." Ava sat on the worn couch near the fireplace, watching the flames with the distant expression of someone who'd stopped believing safety was real. "How long do we stay here?" "Until we draw Brennan out, or until we're certain he's moved on to other targets." Mac crouched beside her. "Could be days. Could be weeks." "And if he doesn't come?" "Then you live." Mac's voice went soft. "You ride your scooter, you make memories with your brother, and you prove that the people trying to hurt you don't get to win." Ava nodded, but didn't look convinced. "Mac, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Do you think we're going to survive this?" The question deserved honesty. Mac had spent 30 years watching people lie to dying children about their chances, and he'd promised himself he'd never become that kind of coward. "I think you've already survived more than most people endure in a lifetime," he said carefully. Whether you survive this specific situation depends on variables I can't control, but I can promise you won't face it alone. That's not actually comforting. No, Mac agreed. But it's true. He stayed until they both fell asleep, Liam on the couch beside his sister, Ava wrapped in a blanket with her head against her brother's shoulder, both of them looking younger than their years and more exhausted than children should ever be. Back at the clubhouse, the core leadership gathered around the war room table, a scarred piece of plywood on sawhorses that had served as strategic planning center through 3 decades of club conflicts. Kane spread out a map of Millbrook and surrounding areas, marking locations with red pins. Brennan's been spotted at 3 different places in the past week: gas station on Route 9, Motel 6 off the interstate, and the Iron Jackal's old clubhouse before it got seized by the feds. So he's local, Trigger observed. Not running, not hiding, which means he's confident. Or stupid, Nick added. Confident, Kane corrected. Nobody survives 5 years in Leavenworth by being stupid. He knows we know he's here. He wants us scared. Is it working? Jinx asked from the doorway. She'd returned after dropping off supplies at the cabin, and her presence meant this conversation was about to get complicated because Jinx had a way of asking questions people preferred to avoid. Should we be scared? She pressed when nobody answered. One enforcer against an entire club seems like bad math from his perspective. Unless he's not working alone, Max said quietly, and everyone's attention snapped to him. Brennan's good, but he's not suicide mission good. If he's moving this bold, he's got backup we haven't identified yet. Kane's jaw tightened. You think the Jackals sent a team? I think we're assuming Brennan is our only problem, and that might be a fatal mistake. The words settled over the room like fog rolling in, obscuring visibility, making everything uncertain. Nick pulled up surveillance footage on his laptop, scrubbing through hours of clubhouse exterior cameras. Nothing unusual, no unknown vehicles, no suspicious activity. Which means they're better at this than we expected. Trigger leaned forward, studying the screen. Professional, patient, waiting for us to make a mistake. Or waiting for us to move Ava again, Jinx said. The cabin's isolated, but it's also predictable. Standard biker safe house protocol. Brennan probably knows exactly where we'd take them. Then we don't move them, Kane decided. We fortify the cabin and we draw Brennan out by making him think we've dropped our guard. How? Mac asked. I'm going to make a phone call. Kane pulled out his burner phone. To the one person who might know where Brennan's head is at. Who? My daughter. The room went silent. Emma's been dating a guy named Marcus for 6 months, Kane continued. Marcus used to run with the Iron Jackals before he went straight. If anyone knows Brennan's moves, it's him. You're going to involve your daughter in this? Mac's voice carried disbelief. The same daughter you've spent 3 years trying to protect from club business? I don't have a choice. Kane's face looked carved from stone. Either I ask for her help and risk her getting angry, or I keep her in the dark and risk her getting hurt when Brennan realizes she's leverage. Leverage for what? For getting to me. Kane met Mac's eyes. You think I'm the only one with a estranged family? Brennan's been doing his research. He knows Emma exists. He knows she matters to me. And if he's smart, which he is, he's already figured out that hurting her will destroy me faster than any bullet. The implications rippled through the room like shockwaves. So now we're protecting 2 targets, Nick said flatly. Ava and Emma, while hunting a professional enforcer who may or may not have backup. Great odds. I'm open to better suggestions, Kane challenged. Nobody offered any. At 2:47 a.m., Kane stood outside the clubhouse under sodium vapor lights that turned the parking lot sodium yellow and dialed his daughter's number for the 2nd time in 8 months. She answered on the 5th ring, voice thick with sleep and confusion. Dad? I need to talk to Marcus, Kane said without preamble. About Lucas Brennan. The silence that followed carried the weight of 3 years' worth of unspoken resentment finally finding voice. It's almost 3 a.m. I know, and I'm sorry, but this is important. Important to you or important to the club? Important to a 13-year-old girl who's dying and doesn't deserve to become collateral damage in a war she didn't start. Emma absorbed that, then, hold on. Shuffling sounds, a male voice in the background asking what was wrong. Emma's muffled response. Then Marcus came on the line, 26 years old, former Iron Jackal who'd walked away from club life in 2020 to become a mechanic at a legitimate shop, and someone who still maintained enough old connections to be useful without being dangerous. "Brennan's in town," Marcus said, without waiting for Kane to explain. "I heard rumors, didn't think they were real until now. What's his play?" "Same as always. Find pressure points, apply force. Break people who matter until the primary target surrenders." Marcus's voice stayed flat and tactical. "He's not trying to kill you, Kane. He's trying to make you suffer first." "How do I stop him?" "You don't, not permanently. Brennan's got 9 years of Iron Jackal loyalty behind him. You take him down, they send someone else. You need to end the entire grudge, which means giving the Jackals something they want more than revenge." "Like what?" "Like proof you weren't the rat." Marcus paused. "Or proof someone else was." Kane's blood went cold. "Explain." "The feds got their information from somewhere. Everyone assumes it was you because you're the obvious target. But what if it wasn't? What if someone else in the Steelhawks fed them information and you're taking the fall?" "There's no one else," Kane said immediately. "I made the decision alone." "You sure about that?" Marcus's voice carried weight. "Think carefully. Who else knew about your meetings with the feds? Who else had access to the information you shared?" Kane's mind raced backward through the past 3 months, retracing conversations, identifying moments when he'd been careless, remembering times when he'd left documents visible or discussed sensitive matters within earshot of. "Nick," Kane whispered. "Your prospect?" "He was in the garage when I took the federal prosecutor's call. I thought he'd left, but maybe—" Kane's voice turned to gravel. "Maybe he stayed. Maybe he heard everything, and maybe he made his own deal. Why would Nick rat? His sister's fighting cancer. Medical bills are destroying his family. The feds probably offered him money to corroborate my information." Kane felt something fundamental shifting in his chest. "I gave them the intelligence. He gave them the verification. Together we buried the Iron Jackals." "Which means you're not the only target," Marcus concluded. "Brennan's after both of you. He just started with the easier mark, the dying girl connected to your club, because hitting you through your people hurts worse than hitting you direct." Kane closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his own stupidity crushing down like concrete. "And I gave him permission to do it by keeping secrets." "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "You did." Emma came back on the line. "Dad? Whatever you're planning, don't do it alone." "I won't." "Promise me." "I promise." Kane's voice cracked. "And Emma? I'm sorry for all of it." "I know." She paused. "Call me when this is over. We'll get coffee. Talk about things that don't involve motorcycle clubs and federal prosecutions." "I'd like that." He hung up and stood in the parking lot for another 5 minutes, watching his breath condense in the cold December air and trying to figure out how to tell his brothers that one of their own had betrayed them without starting a civil war inside the Steel Hawks. Inside the clubhouse, Nick was still working at his laptop, monitoring camera feeds from the cabin where Liam and Ava slept. Kane watched him from the doorway. This young prospect who'd spent months earning trust, learning traditions, and proving loyalty through action. Nick had welded parts for Ava's scooter. He'd stayed late helping Liam troubleshoot electrical problems. He'd donated his own money when the budget ran short, and underneath all that goodness, he'd been making deals with the same federal prosecutor who'd promised Kane a clean slate. "Nick," Kane said quietly. The prospect looked up, expression neutral. "Yeah, Press?" "Turn off the cameras." Nick's hand froze over the keyboard. Just for a second, just long enough to confirm everything Kane suspected. "Why would I do that?" "Because I need to have a conversation you don't want recorded." The garage became a tomb, silent except for the distant hum of the clubhouse refrigerator and the ticking of cooling motorcycle engines outside. Every biker still present felt the shift in atmosphere, the sudden tension that preceded violence. Nick stood slowly, hands visible, body language going defensive. "Whatever you think I did, I know what you did," Kane interrupted. "Marcus told me everything, the federal deal, the money, the corroboration you provided to make my intelligence actionable." Nick's face went pale, then red. Then something that looked like resignation. "My sister's dying. he said quietly. Cancer treatment costs $400,000. Insurance caps out at 50. I was drowning, President. The feds offered me a lifeline. By betraying your club. By doing what you were already doing, Nick's voice rose. You gave them the intelligence first. I just confirmed it. We're both rats. The only difference is you're president, so somehow that makes your betrayal noble and mine unforgivable. The accusation landed like a punch, because he wasn't entirely wrong. Kane had made the first deal. He'd broken the fundamental rule of outlaw brotherhood by cooperating with federal law enforcement. Nick had just followed the path Kane himself had cleared. But there was a difference. Kane had made his choice to protect the club's future. Nick had made his choice to save his own family. One was strategic betrayal. The other was personal. And in the brutal calculus of motorcycle club loyalty, personal betrayal always carried a heavier price. You should have told me, Kane said. You should have told the club before making deals with the feds, Nick countered. But you didn't, because you knew they'd vote against it. So you went around them, made unilateral decisions, and now you're angry someone else followed your example. The argument cut both ways, and they both knew it. Mac had been listening from the shadows near the workbench, and now he stepped forward with his hands raised in a gesture meant to de-escalate. This isn't productive. We can figure out accountability after we deal with Brennan. Brennan's not coming for me, Nick said flatly. He's coming for both of us, and he's using Ava as bait to draw us out. Then we give him what he wants, Kane decided. Which is? Both of us. Together. In one location where he thinks he has the advantage. Kane's voice went cold and tactical. We set up a meet. We offer surrender in exchange for leaving Ava and Emma alone. And when Brennan moves to take us, we turn the tables and finish this permanently. That's suicide, Nick said. No, that's the only move we have left. But Kane met his eyes. You wanted to be a Steelhawk? This is what that means. We protect our people even when it costs us everything. Nick stood there for a long moment, weighing options that all led to the same inevitable conclusion. Finally, he nodded once. When? Tomorrow night. Old quarry off Route 7. Tell Brennan we'll be there at midnight. No weapons, no backup. Just two rats ready to face consequences. He'll kill us both. Probably, Kane agreed. But at least Ava and Emma will live. Mac watched this exchange with growing horror, because he recognized the shape of this sacrifice and knew exactly where it led. Nowhere good, with corpses at the end and the club fractured beyond repair. There's another option, Mac said. Both men turned toward him. We tell the truth. All of it. To everyone. Mac's voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent 30 years hiding from honesty and finally understood the cost. We call a full club meeting. We admit what Kane did, what Nick did, and what that means for the Steel Hawks. We let the Brotherhood decide collectively how to handle Brennan, instead of two guilty men making martyr plays that solve nothing. The club will tear itself apart, Kane said. Maybe, Mac agreed, or maybe they'll surprise you. But either way, they deserve the chance to choose instead of discovering your bodies tomorrow and spending the rest of their lives wondering if they could have stopped it. Kane looked at Nick. Nick looked back. And in that moment, they both reached the same conclusion. Mac was right. The full Steelhawks Brotherhood gathered at 6 a.m., summoned by emergency text messages that carried two words, mandatory church. 43 members showed up within an hour. Everyone from full patch riders to prospects still earning their colors, all of them sensing something had shifted fundamentally in the club's dynamics, and none of them quite prepared for what was about to drop. They assembled in the main room of the clubhouse, standing in a loose circle around the war room table, where Kane and Nick stood side by side like defendants awaiting judgment. Mama Jean locked the doors. Trigger disabled the security cameras, and Mac took position near the window where he could watch approaching vehicles while the confessions began. Kane spoke first. He told them everything. The federal prosecutor. The deal to expose the Iron Jackals, the unilateral decision to cooperate without club approval, and the consequences that had followed, Brennan's arrival, the attack on Ava, the realization that his choices had endangered everyone connected to the Steelhawks. I thought I was protecting us, Kane said, voice stripped of its usual authority. I thought making us legitimate was worth any cost, but I was wrong. And now a 13-year-old girl is hiding in a safe house because I couldn't admit my mistakes earlier. The room stayed silent. No judgment yet. Just listening. Then Nick spoke. He told them about his sister, about the cancer, about the medical debt that was destroying his family, and the federal offer that had seemed like salvation. About confirming Kane's intelligence in exchange for money he desperately needed, and the slow realization that he'd betrayed everything the Steelhawks represented. I'm not asking forgiveness, Nick finished. I'm just explaining how we got here, and offering you the choice Kane and I never gave you. What happens next? The silence that followed felt like a loaded gun waiting to discharge. Finally, Wrench, 52 years old, founding member, and someone who'd served 8 years in federal prison for refusing to cooperate with a grand jury investigation, stepped forward. You're both rats, he said flatly. By any traditional standard, you should be out bad. Patches cut off, names removed from club records, thrown to Brennan without protection. Kane nodded. I understand. But, Wrench continued, and the word hung in the air like a rope that might be salvation or noose depending on what came next. Traditional standards assume you acted out of cowardice or greed, and I don't think that's what happened here. He looked at Kane. You made a stupid choice trying to protect something you thought mattered more than honor. That's not cowardice. That's misguided leadership. Then at Nick. And you made a desperate choice trying to save your family. That's not greed. That's love without better options. Wrench turned to address the full assembly. So here's what I propose. We don't throw them out. We don't hand them to Brennan, but we also don't let them make unilateral decisions anymore. From here forward, Steelhawks operates as true democracy. Every major decision gets voted on. No more presidential executive power. No more secrets that endanger the Brotherhood. And Brennan? Trigger asked. We handle him together. Wrench's voice went hard. All of us. Because if the Iron Jackals think they can pick off our people one by one, they need to learn exactly what happens when you threaten a unified Brotherhood. Slowly, heads began nodding around the circle. Not everyone agreed. Some faces still carried anger, others showed skepticism. But enough consensus formed that Mac could see a path forward that didn't end in civil war or corpses. Vote, Kane said. All in favor of Wrench's proposal? 38 hands rose, 5 abstained. Nobody voted against. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. Then it's settled, Kane said. Nick and I keep our patches but lose our autonomy, and we take down Brennan collectively. How? Spider asked from the back. Mac stepped forward, pulling out his phone and opening a text message that had arrived 3 minutes earlier. I might have a solution, but it's going to require trusting someone we've spent years viewing as an enemy. He showed them the screen. The message was from Lucas Brennan himself. Meet me alone. Old Quarry. Tomorrow midnight. Come ready to talk or come ready to die. Either way, this ends. But underneath, in smaller text, P.S. The Jackals don't know I'm doing this. I'm tired of taking orders from men who care more about revenge than survival. Maybe we can find another way. The room erupted into chaos, bikers shouting over each other, some calling the message a trap, others suggesting it might be legitimate, everyone trying to process the possibility that their enemy might be offering an exit ramp from this collision course. Mac let them argue for 30 seconds, then whistled sharply. Listen, I know Brennan. Rode with him for 6 months in 2008 before the club split. He's brutal, but he's not irrational. If he's reaching out, it's because he sees something we don't. Or because he wants to draw you out and kill you, Jinx countered. Possible, Mac agreed. But I'm willing to take that risk if it means protecting Ava and Emma and everyone else Brennan might target. Kane's voice cut through the debate. This should be a club decision. Mac doesn't go alone unless we vote to send him. They voted. 41 in favor. 2 against. Mac would meet Brennan at the quarry tomorrow at midnight. And whatever happened there would determine whether the Steelhawks survived this war or became another cautionary tale about outlaw clubs that forgot what they were supposed to protect. Back at the cabin, Ava woke from a nightmare to find her brother sitting by the window with a kitchen knife in his lap, watching the darkness beyond the glass like he expected monsters to materialize from the tree line. Liam? Her voice came out small and scared. He turned, and she saw something in his face that hadn't been there before. A hardness that looked wrong on a 14-year-old, but made terrible sense given everything they'd endured. "Go back to sleep," he said gently. "Are they coming?" "I don't know. But if they do, I'm ready." Ava rolled her wheelchair closer, placed her hand over his where it gripped the knife handle. "You can't fight them. Not alone. Not like this." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Liam's voice cracked. "Just wait here while adults make decisions that'll get us both killed? Hope that the same bikers who got us into this mess somehow figure out how to get us out?" "Yes," Ava said simply, "because that's what trust looks like. And because dying with a knife in your hand accomplishes nothing except making me watch you become someone you'll hate." The words hit him like cold water. Liam looked down at the knife, then at his sister, and slowly set the blade aside. "I'm scared." "Me too." They sat together in the darkness, watching the window where snow had started falling again, and tried to believe that somewhere out there, dangerous men were building a future where they might still survive. Tomorrow at midnight, Mac would meet Brennan at the quarry, and everything that mattered would be decided by men who'd spent their lives proving the world wrong about who they really were beneath the leather and the scars and the brutal reputation that preceded them everywhere they went. The quarry sat 2 miles off Route 7 like a wound cut into the earth and left to rot. 300 feet of limestone walls dropping into black water that reflected nothing, surrounded by dead trees and rusted construction equipment that hadn't moved since the operation shut down in 2011. The kind of place where sound died before it reached civilization, and the darkness felt intentional, like the land itself had decided to stop cooperating with the living. Mac arrived 40 minutes early because punctuality in situations like this meant the difference between control and ambush. He killed his Harley's engine at the quarry's edge, letting the silence rush in like floodwater. December wind cut through his leather jacket and found every scar on his body, every old break that weather made sing. His breath came out in white plumes that dissolved into nothing. He lit a cigarette and smoked it down to the filter while studying the terrain. One access road, no cover between the tree line and the quarry rim, and enough open ground that approaching vehicles would be visible at least 2 minutes before arrival. Good sight lines, bad escape routes. He told the club he was going alone, but that wasn't entirely true. Trigger was positioned a quarter-mile east with binoculars and a burner phone. Spider sat in a blacked-out truck on the access road with the engine running. And Kane, despite losing his unilateral authority, had stationed himself on the ridge overlooking the quarry with enough firepower to turn a bad situation into a survivable one. Mac's phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. Text from Trigger. "No movement. You're still alone. 13 minutes. He smoked another cigarette and thought about Ava, about the way she'd looked at him that night in the garage when she asked if they were going to survive this, and about the answer he'd given her that was honest but not comforting. He thought about his own daughter, the one he'd lost through years of choosing club over family, and wondered if this was the moment where he finally broke that pattern or repeated it one last time. Headlights appeared on the access road at 11:53. Single vehicle, moving slow. Headlights on low beam, which suggested the driver wasn't trying to blind anyone and wasn't in a hurry to arrive. Mac ground out his cigarette and stood, positioning himself 10 feet from the quarry's edge, with his hands visible and his back exposed to nothing but limestone and cold air. The vehicle stopped 50 yards away. Engine idling, headlights cutting twin beams through the darkness that illuminated Mac like a specimen under examination. Then the engine cut off. The headlights died. Footsteps on gravel. Deliberate. Heavy. The sound of someone who moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to walking toward danger instead of away from it. Lucas Brennan emerged from the darkness like something the night had decided to stop hiding. 41 years old, built like a fighter who'd never stopped training even during 5 years behind federal walls. Close-cropped hair, jaw like an anvil, and eyes that processed threat assessment the way normal people processed weather, constantly, automatically, without emotional interference. He wore a black tactical jacket over dark clothes, no visible weapons, and carried himself with the coiled stillness of someone who could transition from conversation to violence without wasting a single breath. He stopped 15 feet from Mac, close enough to talk, far enough to react. "Delaney," Brennan said. Not a greeting, an identification. "Brennan." They studied each other across 15 feet of dead quarry ground while wind howled through the limestone walls and made the darkness vibrate. "You came alone?" Brennan asked. "Close enough. Your backup on the ridge and the truck on the access road don't count as alone." Mac didn't react. "You came prepared." "I came informed." Brennan's voice stayed flat. "Thermal imaging from a drone I launched an hour ago. Your man on the ridge has poor discipline. He keeps checking his phone. And your driver on the access road left his parking lights on." The admission was tactical, not threatening. Brennan was demonstrating capability without deploying it. "You said in your message the jackals don't know you're here," Max said. "They don't." "Why?" Brennan took a long breath, and for the first time something beneath his operational calm shifted. Not quite emotion, but close enough to recognize. "Because I'm done being someone else's weapon. I've spent 20 years hurting people for a club that never gave a damn whether I lived or died." Leavenworth clarified things. 5 years in a cell strips away everything except what's real. And what's real? That I don't want to kill a 13-year-old girl to settle a score between men who'll be dead or in prison within 10 years anyway. Mac processed this slowly. Then why the SUV? Why the threat? Why terrorize kids if you're not committed to the mission? Something behind Brennan's eyes flickered. "That wasn't me." The words landed like a detonation in the silence. "What?" Mac's voice went sharp. "The SUV at the intersection. That wasn't my operation." Brennan's jaw tightened. "When I heard about it, I assumed it was a jackal freelancer running ahead of orders. But when I investigated..." He stopped, started again. "It wasn't the jackals at all." "Then who?" Brennan reached slowly into his jacket pocket, watching Mac's body language for any sign of escalation, and pulled out a folded photograph. He held it out across the distance between them. "This was taken by traffic camera footage I pulled through a contact at Millbrook PD, the driver of the Escalade." Mac took 3 careful steps forward, accepted the photograph, and angled it toward the distant glow of his Harley's instrument panel to see. The image was grainy but clear enough. A woman behind the wheel of the black Escalade, face partially visible through the driver's window, caught in the motion of running a red light at the intersection of Main and 7th. Mac's hands went still. His breathing stopped, because the woman in the photograph was someone he recognized. Someone every Steelhawk would recognize. Someone whose face hung on a memorial wall inside the clubhouse kitchen, beneath a plaque that read, "Gone but never forgotten." "That's not possible," Mac whispered. "I had the same reaction," Brennan said. Mac stared at the photograph for another 10 seconds, waiting for his vision to correct itself, for the grainy image to resolve into someone else's face, for reality to reassert itself and confirm that what he was seeing was a mistake. It didn't. "Sarah Delaney," Brennan said quietly, "your ex-wife. Reported dead in a house fire in 2018. Closed casket funeral. Insurance payout of $300,000 that went, according to my research, directly into the Steelhawks operating fund." Mac's legs felt like they'd been cut from beneath him. He stumbled backward 2 steps, the photograph trembling in his scarred hands, and for the first time in 30 years, the old biker looked like someone who'd been struck hard enough to damage something fundamental. "She's dead," Mac said, but the words came out hollow. "I identified the dental records matched." The coroner confirmed. The coroner who signed the death certificate retired to Costa Rica 6 weeks after the fire with enough money to never work again, Brennan interrupted. "Dental records can be falsified when you have access to the right people, and closed casket funerals are convenient when there's no actual body to display." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Sarah Delaney didn't die in that fire. She disappeared, changed her name, moved to Baltimore, and for the past 8 years she's been building a case against every motorcycle club in the Northeastern Corridor, including the Iron Jackals and the Steel Hawks." Mac's mind was fracturing. 8 years. His ex-wife had been alive for 8 years while he mourned her, while guilt ate holes through his chest every single night, while he told himself the fire was somehow his fault for driving her away through years of club-first selfishness. "She staged her own death," Mac said slowly, testing the words. "To escape." "Oh, to infiltrate," Brennan corrected. Sarah's been working with federal law enforcement since before the fire. That's deep cover, long game, the kind of operation that takes years to build and destroys everything it touches when it finally detonates. The federal prosecutor who approached Kane was part of Sarah's operation. She identified Kane as the weakest point in the Steelhawks' leadership, someone with enough guilt about his daughter to be manipulated into cooperating. The entire deal, the intelligence sharing, the promise of legitimacy, was designed to create internal fractures that would make the club vulnerable to prosecution. And Nick? Also targeted. His sister's medical debt made him desperate enough to accept federal money without questioning where it came from or who was pulling the strings. Mac felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, not physically, but existentially. Everything he'd believed about the past 8 years was a lie, constructed by someone he'd once loved more than anything in the world. "But Ava," Mac said, and his voice cracked. "The SUV, why would Sarah target a dying child?" Brennan's expression went complicated, anger mixed with something that might have been disgust. Because Ava's scooter project went viral. Social media picked it up. News stations started calling. The Steelhawks were suddenly getting positive coverage that threatened to humanize a club Sarah's spent 8 years building a case against. If the public sees bikers as guardians instead of criminals, her entire operation loses its narrative foundation. So she tried to kill Ava to keep the Steelhawks looking dangerous. She tried to create an incident that would generate negative coverage. The SUV was supposed to scare, not kill. But Sarah always had a problem with proportionality. Brennan's voice carried the weight of personal experience. She ran the same playbook against the Iron Jackals 2 years ago, staged a confrontation near a school zone that made national news. 5 Jackals arrested, 3 convicted. The club's been bleeding members ever since. Mac's phone buzzed. Text from Trigger. Car approaching from south. Not part of our setup. Get out now. Brennan saw the change in Mac's posture and immediately went tactical. We're compromised. How fast can your backup extract? 60 seconds if they're smart. Then we have about 40. Brennan pulled a second phone from his pocket, checked a security app. The approaching vehicle matches the Escalade from the intersection. Same plates. Sarah? She's been monitoring this quarry since yesterday. Probably has audio surveillance too, which means she heard everything I just told you. Brennan's voice stayed calm, but his body was already moving toward the tree line. If she's coming here in person, it's because she's decided this operation is blown and she's switching to containment mode. What does containment look like? Everyone who knows the truth disappears. Permanently. Mac's motorcycle was 40 feet away. His backup was a quarter-mile east and on the access road. And somewhere in the darkness, a woman he'd mourned for 8 years was driving toward them with the intention of burying everything she'd built, including the people who'd discovered it. He ran. Boots slamming gravel, wind tearing at his jacket. The photograph of Sarah still clutched in his left hand while his right reached for the Harley's handlebars. Behind him, Brennan moved in the opposite direction, toward his own vehicle, toward his own survival, toward whatever exit strategy he'd prepared for the moment things went sideways. Mac hit the ignition, and the Harley roared to life, headlight cutting a beam through the quarry darkness. He gunned the engine, spraying gravel, and aimed for the access road where Spider's truck waited. The Escalade appeared at the quarry entrance like a predator materializing from shadows, headlights blazing, engine roaring, accelerating directly toward Mac's motorcycle with the kind of deliberate trajectory that confirmed Brennan's warning. This wasn't a scared woman running from exposure. This was a trained operative executing a contingency plan. Mac swerved hard right, Harley leaning at an angle that would have been suicidal on wet pavement, but worked on loose gravel through sheer force of experience and desperation. The Escalade blew past him close enough that its side mirror clipped his left arm, sending pain exploding up through his shoulder. Spider's truck pulled onto the access road behind him, headlights flooding the scene. Trigger's voice crackled through the burner phone. Mac, talk to me. What's happening? Go! Mac shouted into the wind. Get back to the clubhouse. Full lockdown. Nobody leaves until I get there. He pushed the Harley to 80 on the 2-lane road back toward Millbrook, checking mirrors every 3 seconds for the Escalade's headlights. Nothing behind him. Either Sarah had gone after Brennan instead, or she'd decided pursuit was tactically unsound given the witnesses. Mac reached the clubhouse at 12:31 a.m., sliding to a stop in the parking lot and dismounting before the engine fully died. His left arm hung at a wrong angle. The mirror impact had done something to his shoulder that hurt too much to be superficial, but pain was something he'd deal with later. Kane met him at the door, already reading the damage. "What happened?" "Inside. Everyone. Now." They gathered in the main room again, fewer this time, just the core leadership plus Mama Jean and Jinx, faces drawn and wary in the overhead light that made everyone look 10 years older. Mac threw the photograph onto the war room table. "That's Sarah," he said. "My ex-wife. The one we buried in 2018. She's alive. She's been working with the feds for 8 years. She's the one who targeted Kane and Nick. She's the one who drove the Escalade at Ava, and she's the reason all of this is happening." The silence that followed felt like the oxygen had been sucked from the room. Mama Jean picked up the photograph, studied it with the careful attention of someone who'd known Sarah Delaney for 15 years before the fire. "That's her. The jaw. The way she holds her head tilted left." "This is insane," Nick said. "This is real." Mac's voice carried the raw edge of someone whose entire history had just been rewritten. Brennan confirmed it. Sarah faked her death, built a federal operation targeting outlaw clubs, and used Kane's guilt about Emma to create the intelligence breach that brought Brennan to Millbrook in the first place. "So Brennan's not the enemy," Trigger said slowly. "Brennan's a weapon pointed at us by someone who used to sleep in my bed." Mac's hand was shaking. He pressed it flat against the table to make it stop. He was hired by the Jackals based on information Sarah fed them. She wanted the clubs to destroy each other so the feds could sweep up the remains. Kane absorbed this with the expression of someone watching their entire worldview collapse in real time. "The federal prosecutor, the one I made the deal with. He was Sarah's handler? Her partner, maybe more. Brennan wasn't specific. And the information I gave them, the Jackal intelligence, was probably already known. They didn't need your intelligence. They needed your cooperation on record so they could use it as leverage later. Blackmail material. Proof that the Steelhawks president was a federal informant. Enough to destroy the club's reputation and make prosecution easier." Kane sat down heavily, not in a chair but on the concrete floor, back against the wall, head in his hands. "I handed them everything they needed to end us, and I thought I was being clever." "You thought you were protecting us," Mac corrected, though his voice carried no forgiveness. "Same mistake I made with Sarah. Same mistake everyone in this room has made at some point. We thought we could control dangerous people by giving them what they wanted." "What does Sarah want?" Jinx asked. "Specifically, what's the end game?" "RICO prosecution," Max said. "Racketeering charges that bring down the entire Steelhawks organization. Every member, every asset, everything we've built over 40 years seized by the federal government." "Based on what evidence?" Trigger pressed. "Based on everything. Kane's cooperation proves we're willing to deal with feds when it suits us, which undermines any credibility we'd have in court. Nick's payments prove financial corruption. And the original intelligence about the Jackals proves we have insider knowledge of criminal operations, which means we're either participants or facilitators. None of which would stick without testimony," Mama Jean said from her position by the kitchen door. "RICO needs witnesses, someone who can connect the dots in front of a jury. Photos and recordings aren't enough without someone to explain them." "Sarah is the witness," Max said. 8 years undercover. She knows everything. Club finances, member histories, every questionable decision we've made since she supposedly died." He paused. "She lived with me for 12 years. She's been inside this clubhouse more times than most prospects. She knows where the bodies are buried, figuratively and otherwise." The weight of that truth settled over the room like concrete hardening around their feet. "Then we find her," Kane said from the floor, voice muffled by his hands. "Before she files her case, before she testifies. We find her and we what?" Mac's voice went sharp. "Kill her? Threaten her? Kidnap a federal witness and add obstruction charges to whatever she's already building? I was going to say talk to her. You don't talk to someone who spent 8 years constructing your destruction. You don't negotiate with someone who faked their own death to escape your world." Mac's voice cracked. "I know, because I'm the one she escaped from." The admission hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been burning for years, because that was the hidden truth beneath all of this. The thing Mac hadn't said and everyone was too afraid to ask. Sarah hadn't just faked her death to go undercover. She'd faked her death to escape Mac, to escape the club, to escape a life that had become so suffocating, so dominated by outlaw loyalty and male violence, and the constant subordination of everything soft beneath everything hard, that burning down her own identity felt like the only way out. She wasn't just an operative, Max said quietly, staring at the photograph. She was a woman who ran because I gave her no reason to stay. That doesn't justify what she's doing, Trigger said. No, but it explains it. And if we want to survive this, we need to understand motivation, not just threat. Mama Jean moved to the center of the room with the deliberate authority of someone who'd spent 37 years watching men make catastrophic decisions and was finally done standing in the doorway. I'm going to say something none of you want to hear. Everyone turned. Sarah Delaney was my friend. For 12 years, she sat in that kitchen with me every Friday night while you boys rode your bikes and pretended the world was simple. She told me things she never told Mac, about her fears, about feeling invisible, about watching the man she loved choose leather and engines over her every single time. Mama Jean's voice carried steel. And when she died, when we thought she died, I cried for 3 weeks straight. I put flowers on an empty grave every month for 2 years. I wrote letters to a dead woman because I never got to say goodbye. She picked up the photograph, looked at it with eyes that contained fury and grief in equal measure. So don't you dare reduce her to an enemy. She's someone we failed, someone I failed, and whatever she's become, we helped make her. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Mac had ever heard. His phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Mac, I know you found the photograph. I know Brennan told you everything. Meet me at the old house on Birch Street tomorrow at noon. Come alone. No weapons, no backup, no tricks. We need to talk about what happens next. S. Sarah. Mac showed the text to the room. Kane stood, read it over his shoulder, and his expression hardened into something between fear and determination. It's a trap, Nick said immediately. Maybe, Mac agreed. Or maybe she's offering what Brennan offered, an exit ramp before everything detonates. You can't go, Kane said. I have to go. She won't talk to anyone else. Whatever this is, prosecution, revenge, escape, it started with me, and it ends with me. Then we vote, Trigger said, like we agreed. No more unilateral decisions. They voted, 27-6. Mac would go. But before the meeting disbanded, Liam's voice cut through from the doorway where he'd been standing unnoticed for the past 15 minutes, having walked from the cabin alone through December darkness because he couldn't sleep and couldn't sit still and couldn't stop feeling like the adults protecting him were also the ones endangering him. What about Ava? Every head turned. You keep talking about your club and your evidence and your ex-wife and your federal case. Liam's 14-year-old voice shook with anger. But nobody's mentioned my sister in the last hour. She's still in that cabin. She's still sick. She's still scared. And while you're all sitting here discussing your histories and your guilt and your complicated relationship bullshit, she's alone. The accusation landed like a grenade. How did you get here? Kane demanded. Walked, 3 miles through the woods in the dark. Because the burner phone Mac gave me stopped receiving signals an hour ago and I thought you were dead. Mac checked his phone. The signal was fine, which meant someone had jammed the cabin's communication deliberately. Ava's alone, Mac said, and his voice carried sudden, terrible urgency. Without communication. I left her sleeping, Liam said, but his face was already going pale. She was fine when I... How long ago? Maybe 90 minutes. I walked fast, but the terrain... Mac was already moving. Kane grabbed his keys. Nick powered up the surveillance laptop only to find all 4 cabin cameras showing static. No feed, no signal. Nothing but snow on the screen like the equipment had been systematically disabled. Cameras are down, Nick said, and his voice carried the particular terror of someone realizing their worst fear was happening in real time. Mac, Kane, and Trigger hit the parking lot at a dead sprint. 3 Harleys roared to life simultaneously, headlights cutting through December darkness as they tore out of the clubhouse lot and onto the county road heading north toward the cabin. Liam ran after them, screaming his sister's name, but couldn't keep up. Spider grabbed him, forced him into the truck, and followed the motorcycles at dangerous speed through winding forest roads that weren't built for emergency evacuation. The ride took 11 minutes. It felt like 11 years. They found the cabin door open. Not forced, not broken, just open. Swinging gently in the wind like someone had walked out without bothering to close it behind them. The motion sensor lights were dark. Bulbs removed, not broken. The tripwires on the access road had been carefully cut and reset to look undisturbed. Professional work. The kind that required training and patience and the specific knowledge of how the Steelhawks set up their safe houses. Knowledge that Sarah Delaney had acquired over 12 years of marriage to their most senior member. Mac entered first, moving through the dark cabin with his phone flashlight cutting shadows that jumped and twisted. Kitchen empty. Living room empty. Fire in the fireplace burned down to embers that cast orange light across walls that looked like they were bleeding. Ava's wheelchair sat in the center of the living room. Empty. The blanket she'd been wrapped in lay folded neatly on the seat, not thrown aside in panic, but placed with deliberate care, which somehow made it worse because it suggested whoever took her had done so calmly, methodically, without rushing. On the blanket, a sealed envelope addressed to Mac in handwriting he recognized immediately because he'd seen it on grocery lists and birthday cards, and the divorce papers he'd never had to sign because the fire made them unnecessary. Sarah's handwriting. Mac opened the envelope with hands that shook so badly Kane had to hold the flashlight steady. Inside, a single sheet of paper with 3 sentences. She's safe. She's with me. And she'll stay safe as long as you do exactly what I tell you. Beneath the words, a Polaroid photograph. Ava sitting in what looked like a motel room, wrapped in a different blanket, looking scared but unharmed, holding a copy of today's Millbrook Gazette as proof of timeline. Mac's legs buckled. He caught himself against the wall, pressing his forehead to cold wood, and made a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sob, but contained the compressed grief of a man realizing that the person he'd spent 8 years mourning was now holding a dying child hostage. Liam arrived 90 seconds later. He saw the empty wheelchair. Read the note over Mac's shoulder. Looked at the photograph. And then something inside him changed, visibly, physically, like watching a switch flip behind his eyes from frightened child to something harder and more dangerous. "Where is she?" Liam's voice came out flat. Empty. The voice of someone who'd burned through every emotion available and arrived at a place beyond them. "We don't know yet," Mac managed. "Find her." "We will." "No." Liam turned to face Mac directly, and the old biker flinched at what he saw in this 14-year-old's eyes. "You will find her tonight, not tomorrow, not after your meeting with Sarah, not after another club vote. Tonight. Or I walk out that door and find her myself, and whatever happens after that is on every single one of you." Kane stepped forward. "Kid, you need to let us—" "Let you what? Protect her the way you've been protecting her? She was in your safe house, with your cameras, behind your tripwires, and someone walked in, took her, and walked out without triggering a single alarm." Liam's voice rose. "You failed, all of you, every promise you made, every time you said she was safe, every time you said trust us. It was all worthless." Nobody argued, because he was right. Trigger examined the cabin's perimeter while Nick tried to restore the surveillance equipment. The cameras had been disabled using EMP, a localized electromagnetic pulse device that fried the electronics without physical contact. Military-grade technology that wasn't available on the civilian market. "Sarah's got federal resources," Trigger confirmed. "This isn't a rogue ex-wife. This is a government operation with access to military hardware. Which means we're not just fighting one woman," Kane said, his voice hollow. "We're fighting an entire federal apparatus that's decided we're expendable." Max stood in Ava's empty wheelchair and let the reality of their situation wash over him like ice water. His ex-wife, the woman he'd driven away, mourned, and buried, had taken the one person the entire Steelhawks brotherhood had unified to protect. She'd used knowledge he'd given her during their marriage to bypass every security measure they'd built, and she'd done it with the calm efficiency of someone who'd been planning this moment for years. This wasn't rage, this wasn't revenge. This was strategy. And strategy could be countered, but only by someone willing to become something they'd never been before. Mac pulled out his phone, dialed the unknown number Sarah had texted from. She answered on the second ring. That was faster than I expected. Give her back. Come to 414 Birch Street, tomorrow, noon, alone. Sarah's voice sounded exactly the way he remembered, measured, intelligent, carrying the particular warmth of someone who could make you feel seen while simultaneously dismantling your world. Bring Kane's federal cooperation records, Nick's payment confirmations, everything that proves the Steelhawks have been working with law enforcement. Why? Because I'm going to give you a choice, Mac. The same kind of choice you gave me 12 years ago when you picked the club over our marriage. She paused. You can save the Steelhawks, or you can save Ava, but you can't do both. The line went dead. Mac lowered the phone and looked at the men surrounding him. Kane with his scarred knuckles and shattered authority, Trigger with his prosthetic leg and tactical mind, Nick with his guilt and his dying sister and his compromised loyalty, and Liam standing in the center of it all with eyes that had stopped being a child sometime in the past 3 hours. What did she say? Kane asked. Mac told them, every word, and watched the impossible choice land on each of their faces like a blade being pressed against skin, not cutting yet, but promising. Save the club. Lose the girl. Save the girl. Lose everything else. Liam looked at Mac with those new eyes, the ones that had aged past childhood and arrived at something ancient and merciless. There's no choice. I know, Mac said. You bring her those records. You give her whatever she wants. You burn the Steelhawks to the ground if that's what it takes. But you bring my sister home. Mac looked at Kane. Kane looked at the floor, then at the ceiling, then at the empty wheelchair sitting in the center of the room, like an accusation that would never stop echoing. He's right, Kane whispered. The club survived federal investigations before. We've rebuilt from nothing. We can do it again. He met Mac's eyes. But we can't rebuild a dead child. Mac nodded once, then turned to face the room and said the words that would change everything. The words that transformed him from an aging biker trying to make amends into something new, something harder, something willing to sacrifice 40 years of brotherhood for one 13-year-old girl who deserved better than the world had given her. I'm going to 414 Birch Street tomorrow at noon. I'm bringing everything Sarah asked for, and I'm bringing Ava home. His voice carried the cold certainty of a man who'd finally found something worth losing everything for. If the Steelhawks die because of it, then we die as what we should have been from the beginning. Not outlaws, not criminals, not men hiding behind leather and engines and the illusion of strength. We die as people who chose a child's life over their own survival. He looked at each of them in turn. Kane, Trigger, Nick, Mama Jean, who'd arrived at the cabin doorway with tears she refused to let fall, Jinx standing behind her with fists clenched and jaw set, and Liam, standing in his dead-taped sneakers beside his sister's empty wheelchair, holding the Polaroid photograph against his chest like it was the only proof that hope still existed. Tomorrow at noon, Mac repeated, everything changes. Nobody disagreed, because they all knew he was right. And because somewhere in a motel room with a woman who'd burned down her own life to escape theirs, a 13-year-old girl was waiting to find out whether the dangerous men who'd promised to protect her were capable of keeping that promise when the cost was everything they'd ever been. Mac didn't sleep. He sat at the clubhouse workbench where Ava's scooter had been built, running his scarred fingers along the welding seams he'd taught Liam to make, and waited for dawn like a man counting down to his own execution. His left shoulder throbbed where the Escalade mirror had clipped him. Dislocated, Mama Jean had said, after examining it with hands that had treated worse injuries without flinching. She'd popped it back into the socket with a single brutal motion that made Mac see white for 3 full seconds, then wrapped it tight and told him to stop being stupid. He couldn't stop being stupid. Stupid was all he had left. The clubhouse was quiet at 4 a.m., that particular silence that exists only in buildings where violence has been discussed and decisions have been made that can't be taken back. Coffee percolated in the kitchen, filling the air with something warm and ordinary that felt almost obscene given the circumstances. Kane sat in the corner cleaning a handgun he wouldn't be bringing. Nick hunched over his laptop, pulling every piece of digital evidence the feds could possibly use against the club. Financial records, communication logs, photographs from runs and fundraisers that looked innocent to civilians but could be recontextualized by a skilled prosecutor into evidence of organized criminal enterprise. Trigger stood by the window, watching the parking lot, standing guard over nothing, standing guard over everything. "It's not enough," Nick said finally, breaking the silence without looking up. "Even if we give Sarah every document we have, she's got 8 years of independent surveillance. Our records are just confirmation. She doesn't need them to prosecute." "She doesn't want them for prosecution," Max said quietly. "She wants them for leverage. Proof that we willingly handed over evidence against ourselves. Makes us look cooperative when the case goes to trial. Reduces her burden of proof." "So we're helping her destroy us," Kane said from his corner. "We're helping her bring Ava home. The destruction is a consequence I'm willing to accept." "Easy to say when it's not your life's work on the line." Mac's head turned slowly toward Kane, and something in his eyes made the club president stop talking. "My ex-wife is holding a dying child in a motel room because of choices I made 20 years ago. My life's work is the reason that girl is scared and alone right now instead of sleeping next to her brother. So don't tell me what I'm willing to lose. I've already lost everything that matters." The silence that followed lasted 3 full minutes. Nobody broke it. Nobody needed to. At 5:30 a.m., Liam walked into the garage carrying a backpack and an expression that had calcified overnight into something Mac recognized because he'd seen it in the mirror every morning for the past 30 years. The face of someone who decided that rules only applied to people with something left to lose. "I'm going with you," Liam said. "No. That wasn't a request." Mac stood, blocking the workbench with his body, like the physical obstacle would somehow translate into emotional authority. "Sarah said come alone. I show up with you, she panics. She panics. Ava gets hurt." "Ava's already hurt." Liam's voice carried a flatness that made Mac's chest ache. "She's been hurt since Mom left. She's been hurt since the diagnosis. She's been hurt every single day of her life, and I've been the only person standing between her and the rest of the goddamn world." He stepped closer. "You think I'm going to sit in this garage and wait while someone else decides whether my sister lives or dies? I think you're 14 years old, and you're making emotional decisions that could get both of you killed. I think you're 63 years old, and you're making guilty decisions because you can't handle the fact that your marriage produced a monster." The words hit Mac like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, though they were, but because they were accurate. Sarah's transformation from neglected wife to federal operative hadn't happened in a vacuum. It had been cultivated by years of Mac's absence, his prioritization of club over family, his inability to see the woman beside him as anything other than a supporting character in his outlaw narrative. "You're right," Mac said, and the admission cost him something he could feel leaving his body. "Sarah became what she became partly because of me, which is exactly why I need to face her alone. This isn't about the club anymore. It's about 2 people who destroyed each other and need to stop pretending a 13-year-old girl is just collateral damage in their war." Liam's jaw worked. His eyes glistened, but nothing fell. "If you don't bring her back, I will. If you don't bring her back, I will never forgive you. Not because you failed, because you asked me to trust you when you knew you couldn't guarantee anything." Mac nodded. "That's fair." "It's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. But it's the only deal I've got." At 11:15 a.m., Mac rode his Harley through downtown Millbrook toward 414 Birch Street with a manila envelope of documents in his saddlebag and the weight of 40 years of wrong decisions pressing against his spine. December sunlight cut through bare trees, casting skeletal shadows across the road. The town looked normal, people walking dogs, cars pulling into strip mall parking lots, a group of kids throwing snowballs near the elementary school. Nobody knew that 3 miles away a federal operation was about to collide with a motorcycle club's last act of defiance. Birch Street was residential. Old houses from the 1940s with sagging porches and peeling paint, the kind of neighborhood where people minded their own business because minding someone else's had never done anyone any good. Number 414 sat at the end of a dead-end street, 2-story colonial, white exterior gone gray with age, windows dark, driveway empty except for a mailbox that hadn't been opened in weeks. Mac parked the Harley at the curb, killed the engine. Sat there for 30 seconds listening to the tick of cooling metal and his own heartbeat and tried to remember the last time he'd been this afraid. He couldn't. The front door was unlocked. He pushed it open and stepped into a hallway that smelled like dust, old wood, and the faintest trace of perfume he recognized from another lifetime. Something floral that Sarah used to dab behind her ears before dinner dates they'd stopped having years before the fire. "Close the door," her voice said from somewhere deeper in the house. "Leave the envelope on the table in the hallway." Mac closed the door, set the envelope down, then walked toward the voice with his hands visible and his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his teeth. She was in the kitchen, sitting at a small table beneath a window that let in pale December light, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, looking almost exactly the way he remembered, except for the gray streaking her dark hair and the new sharpness in her eyes, the kind of alertness that came from years of living as someone else, always watching, always calculating, never safe enough to relax. Sarah Delaney, 57 years old, legally dead, functionally alive, and holding all the power in this situation with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent 8 years preparing for this exact moment. Ava wasn't in the room. "Where is she?" Mac asked. "Upstairs. Sleeping." She was exhausted. Sarah's voice carried no apology. "I gave her a proper bed, warm food, and her medication. She's safer right now than she's been in weeks. She's a hostage. She's leverage. There's a distinction. Not to a 13-year-old. Sarah set down her coffee mug with a click that sounded too loud in the empty kitchen. "Sit down, Mac." He didn't sit. "I brought what you asked for. Documents, records. Everything you need to build your case. Now give me Ava and we're done." "We're not done. We're not even close to done." Sarah stood, and Mac was struck by how she'd changed. Not physically so much as energetically. The woman he'd married had been soft-spoken, accommodating, the kind of person who filled silence because emptiness made her anxious. This version of Sarah occupied silence the way a predator occupied a hunting blind. Patiently, deliberately, without waste. "Those documents are insurance," she continued. "They prove the Steelhawks cooperated with my operation willingly, but that's not why I brought you here." "Then why?" "Because I need you to testify." The word landed like a bullet. "Testify," Mac repeated, "in federal court, against the Steelhawks, against the Iron Jackals, against every outlaw club operating in the northeastern corridor." Sarah moved to the counter, poured a second cup of coffee, set it on the table like they were having a normal conversation in a normal kitchen on a normal December afternoon. "I've spent 8 years building this case. I've got evidence against 14 clubs across 6 states. But evidence without testimony is circumstantial. A jury needs a face, a voice, someone who can explain the world behind the leather and the patches and the brotherhood mythology. You want me to burn everything I've spent my life building. I want you to tell the truth." Sarah's voice carried heat for the first time. "About what these clubs really are. About the violence you rationalize. About the women you sideline. About the children who grow up watching their fathers choose engines over bedtime stories and call it tradition." Mac felt something old and dangerous rising in his chest. Not anger exactly, but the particular resentment of a man being confronted with his failures by someone who knew them intimately. "You left," he said. "You didn't just leave. You burned your own life down and let me spend 8 years thinking I'd killed you through neglect. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" "I have a precise idea of what that did to you." Sarah's eyes didn't waver. "The same way I have a precise idea of what staying would have done to me. Slow erasure, day by day, year by year, becoming smaller and quieter until I disappeared entirely, not in a fire, but in the silence between your departure and your return over and over, until I forgot I'd ever been a person with her own wants. So this is revenge. This is justice. There's a distinction. You keep making distinctions that don't exist, and you keep pretending the world you built was worth living in." Sarah stepped closer, and Max saw something in her face he hadn't expected. Not hatred, not triumph, but exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been fighting for so long they couldn't remember what peace felt like. "I loved you, Mac. For 12 years I loved you more than I'd ever loved anything, and you repaid that by making me invisible. I know. You know now. You didn't know then, or you knew and didn't care, which is worse. Just silence settled between them like scar tissue forming over a wound that would never fully close. Let me see Ava, Max said. After we reach an agreement. There's no agreement that involves me testifying against my brothers. Then there's no agreement that involves you leaving with Ava. Sarah's voice went clinical. I'm offering you a deal. Testify and I release Ava, drop all charges against the club's civilian associates, including Liam, and recommend reduced sentencing for any member willing to cooperate. And if I refuse? Then Ava becomes a ward of the state. Child Protective Services takes custody. She gets placed in a medical facility where she'll receive adequate care but zero family contact because her only living relative, her brother, will be entering the foster system as an at-risk youth with known gang affiliations. They're not gang affiliated, they're kids. The court won't see it that way. Not with my testimony establishing the Steelhawks as a criminal organization that recruited minors. Mac's hands curled into fists against his thighs. You do that? To a dying child? I've spent 8 years doing things I never imagined myself capable of. Sarah's voice cracked for the first time. One more won't break me. It already has. The words hung between them while Sarah's composure fractured, just slightly, just around the edges, like ice beginning to splinter under weight it was never designed to hold. She turned away, faced the window, and Max saw her shoulders trembling with the effort of containing whatever was happening inside her. I need this to mean something, Sarah whispered. 8 years. A faked death. A new identity. A life spent lying to everyone, including myself. If it doesn't result in prosecution, if the clubs just survive and keep hurting people, then what was it for? What did I sacrifice everything for? Maybe you sacrificed everything for the wrong reasons. Don't. Her voice went sharp again. Don't you dare reduce my work to a personal grudge. This is bigger than us. Nothing is bigger than us. Mac moved toward her, stopping 3 feet away, close enough to see the tears she was fighting, far enough to respect the distance she'd spent 8 years constructing. That's what I should have told you 20 years ago. That's what I should have said every single day we were together. Nothing, not the club, not the bikes, not the brotherhood, is bigger than the people we love. Sarah didn't turn around. You're saying what I wanted to hear because there's a child upstairs. I'm saying it because it's true, and because it took losing you, twice, to understand it. From somewhere above them, a sound. Small, muffled. The unmistakable creak of a floorboard under someone who weighed very little and moved very carefully. Ava. Mac's eyes went to the ceiling. Sarah's followed, and for a moment they were just 2 people standing in a kitchen, listening to a sick girl move through an unfamiliar house, trying to navigate a world that kept shifting beneath her. She's been asking about her brother, Sarah said quietly. Every hour. Where's Liam? Is Liam okay? Did Liam eat? Never about herself, never about her own situation. She paused. She reminds me of someone. Who? Me. Before I learned to stop putting everyone else first. Mac processed this slowly. Then you understand why I can't testify. Because putting the club first is exactly the mistake I've spent my whole life making. And testifying to save Ava while destroying the brothers who helped build her scooter, the people who showed her kindness when nobody else would, that's just another version of the same betrayal. Then we're at an impasse. Maybe, Mac took a breath. Or maybe there's a third option neither of us has considered. Sarah turned, curiosity overriding caution. What option? What if instead of me testifying against the club testifies for itself? Sarah's brow furrowed. Explain. You want the truth about outlaw culture, the violence, the gender dynamics, the way these organizations perpetuate cycles of harm. What if the Steelhawks voluntarily disclose their operations, not through coerced testimony but through genuine reform? What if we open our books, restructure our leadership, and become the model for what motorcycle clubs could be instead of what they've been? That's naive. It's unprecedented, which makes it valuable to your bosses. A voluntary reformation is worth more politically than a forced prosecution. It demonstrates that change is possible, that outlaw culture can evolve, and it gives your superiors a win they can publicize without the messiness of a RICO trial that could take years and cost millions. Sarah studied him with the analytical intensity of someone weighing variables. And Ava? Ava goes home, tonight, with her brother. And the Steelhawks commit to full transparency with federal oversight for 5 years. Open books, regular audits, community service, whatever it takes to prove we're serious. You can't promise that. You lost your authority to speak for the club. Then let me call them, right now. Put it to a vote. If they agree, you get your reform and your legacy without destroying lives. If they refuse, I'll testify. Personally. Against every member. Your original deal. The offer sat between them like a bomb with a visible timer. Sarah's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her expression changed. Not quite fear, but something adjacent. Hold on. She answered, listened for 30 seconds without speaking, then hung up and turned to Mac with eyes that had gone tactical. We have a problem. What kind? Federal marshals. My handler activated a contingency protocol when I went off script bringing Ava here. There's a team en route to this location. ETA 15 minutes. What happens when they arrive? They secure the premises, they take Ava into protective custody, they arrest you on obstruction charges, and my operation moves forward without negotiation. Sarah's voice carried controlled urgency. I didn't plan this. The handler is overriding my authority because I took too long to produce results. So your own people are shutting you down. My own people are protecting their investment, 8 years of work. They're not going to let one ex-husband and a sick child complicate a case this size. Mac's body went into survival mode. Adrenaline flooding his system, senses sharpening, every tactical instinct he'd developed over 40 years of outlaw life activating simultaneously. We leave. Now. All 3 of us. If I run, I'm a fugitive. My career, my identity, everything I've built. Everything you've built is about to be taken from you anyway. Mac stepped close, voice dropping to something fierce and intimate. They're not coming to help you, Sarah. They're coming to replace you. You've been undercover so long you've become a liability. The handler doesn't need you anymore. He needs your evidence. The truth of it showed on her face. She'd known. Somewhere beneath the operational confidence and the strategic thinking, she'd known this was coming. Handlers didn't activate contingency protocols to protect their agents. They activated them to protect their cases. Ava, Mac said, where upstairs? Second bedroom, end of the hall. Mac moved. He took the stairs 3 at a time, bad shoulder screaming, boots hitting worn carpet with the desperate rhythm of a man racing a clock he couldn't see. The hallway stretched ahead. 3 doors, 2 closed, 1 open at the end where pale light spilled across the floor. Ava sat on the edge of a twin bed in a room that smelled like mothballs and old curtains. She was dressed in clothes that weren't hers, too large sweatshirt, sweatpants rolled at the ankles, and holding her hands together in her lap with the careful stillness of someone who'd learned that being small and quiet was the safest way to survive unfamiliar environments. When she saw Mac, her composure cracked. Mac. Her voice came out broken. Is Liam? He's okay. He's waiting for you. Mac crouched beside the bed, checking her quickly. No visible injuries, color bad but not worse than usual, breathing labored but functional. Can you walk? A little. Not far. I'll carry you. My chair. We'll get you a new chair. Right now we need to move. He lifted her 83 pounds of sick child pressed against his chest, her arms wrapping around his neck with a grip strength that surprised him. She was shaking. He could feel her ribs through the oversized sweatshirt, feel her heartbeat hammering against his own. I knew you'd come, she whispered against his neck. Always. He carried her down the stairs where Sarah was already at the front door, peering through the window at the empty street. They'll approach from both ends, standard containment formation. Back door? Mac asked. Through the kitchen. Opens to an alley that connects to Elm Street 2 blocks north. Your car? Parked on Elm. Black sedan. Keys in my jacket. Sarah pulled on a coat, grabbed a go bag from the hallway closet. The kind of pre-packed emergency kit that spoke to a life spent expecting everything to fall apart at any moment. If we get separated, there's a storage unit on Route 12. Number 47. Everything you need is inside. Copies of my evidence, financial records, communication logs with my handler. Enough to prove the federal operation was unauthorized. Unauthorized? My handler's been running this off books for 3 years, using government resources for a personal vendetta against outlaw clubs that embarrassed him early in his career. If that evidence goes public, the entire case collapses and everyone walks. Max stared at her. You've been building a case against your own handler? Insurance. Sarah's mouth twitched. I learned from the best. You always taught me to have an exit strategy. They moved through the kitchen, Mac carrying Ava, Sarah leading with her go-bag, and out the back door into a narrow alley lined with trash cans and chain-link fencing. December air hit them like a wall. Ava buried her face against Mac's jacket, muffling a cough that sounded too deep for a 13-year-old chest. Left, Sarah directed. Stay close to the fence. They moved fast. Not running, but covering ground with the urgency of people who understood that 15 minutes meant 12 now, probably 10, and every second spent in the open was a second closer to interception. The alley opened onto a residential street. Sarah's sedan sat at the curb, nondescript, government issue, with tinted windows and plates that probably wouldn't trace back to anything real. She unlocked it, opened the rear door. Mac placed Ava carefully in the back seat, buckling her in with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Stay down. Don't look out the windows. Where are we going? Home. Sarah drove. Mac sat beside Ava in the back, one arm around her shoulders, monitoring the mirrors while his phone vibrated with incoming calls he couldn't answer yet. 3 from Kane, 2 from Trigger, 1 from an unknown number that was probably federal. Your husband taught me about honor codes, Sarah said from the driver's seat, eyes on the road. About the brotherhood oath, loyalty unto death, all that poetic outlaw mythology. She glanced in the rear view. But he never told me the part where loyalty becomes a cage, where the oath stops being something you choose and becomes something that chooses you. I know, Max said. I needed to hear someone say that, just once. During those 12 years, one person who understood that my unhappiness wasn't weakness. I should have been that person. Yes, you should have. They drove in silence for 2 miles before Mac's phone buzzed with a text from Kane. Where are you? Marshals hit the clubhouse, took documents. Everyone scattered. Need location now. Mac typed back with one hand while Ava pressed closer against his side. Have Ava. Safe. Sarah with me. Meet at the old mill on River Road. Bring everyone. This ends today. Sarah watched him text through the rearview mirror. You're gathering the club. I'm gathering my family. Same thing? It's supposed to be. The old mill sat on the Millbrook River 3 miles south of town, a massive brick structure from the industrial era that had been abandoned in the 90s and now served as unofficial neutral ground for conversations that couldn't happen anywhere with walls that might be wired. Mac knew it because he'd held 3 of the most important meetings of his life there. Sarah knew it because she'd surveilled it during her years undercover. They arrived first. Mac carried Ava inside and set her on a dusty workbench near a window where gray December light filtered through broken panes. Sarah stood by the entrance, scanning the road with the restless vigilance of someone who'd been hunted before, and recognized the particular quality of air that preceded capture. Motorcycles. The sound reached them before the sight, a distant rumble that grew into a growl that grew into a roar as steelhawks began arriving at the mill in pairs and groups, their Harleys filling the parking area like a gathering storm. Kane first, riding alone with his face carved from granite, Trigger and Spider side by side. Nick with his laptop bag strapped across his chest, Mama Jean in Wrench's sidecar with her jaw set, Jinx with paint stains still on her fingers. And Liam, running across the parking lot before Spider's truck even stopped, stumbling over frozen ground, slamming through the mill entrance with eyes wild and searching until they found his sister sitting on the workbench, alive, wrapped in an oversized sweatshirt, looking at him with an expression that contained every emotion a human being was capable of experiencing simultaneously. Ava. He reached her in 4 steps and collapsed against her, wrapping his arms around her thin frame with the desperate grip of someone who'd spent the last 16 hours believing he might never do this again. Ava? Ava? She held him back. I'm okay. I'm here. Don't ever. I won't. I'm here. They stayed like that while bikers filed into the mill around them, 43 men and women in leather forming a loose circle in the cavernous space, their breath visible in the cold air, their faces showing the particular combination of exhaustion and resolve that comes from being pushed past the point of breaking and discovering you're still standing. Sarah stood apart from the group, watching the reunion with an expression Mac couldn't read. Not regret exactly, not envy, something more complicated. The look of someone observing a version of family she'd never been invited to participate in and wondering whether the exclusion was their failure or her own. Kane approached her, 6'4" of scarred muscle and fractured authority, moving with the careful deliberation of a man who understood that the next 5 minutes would determine whether his life's work survived or disintegrated. "You took a child," he said. Not shouting, worse than shouting, the cold, measured tone of someone cataloging facts before making irreversible decisions. "I did." "You terrorized a dying girl to build leverage against a motorcycle club." "I did." "And now you're here, in our space, surrounded by people who have every reason to hurt you and no legal obligation to restrain themselves." Sarah met his eyes without flinching. "I'm here because your man offered me something I didn't know I wanted. A way out that doesn't require destroying everything." "Mac's deal," Kane said. "Voluntary reformation." "Yes." "And if we refuse?" "Then the evidence goes public. My handler's unauthorized operation gets exposed. The entire federal case collapses. The Steelhawks walk free. Legally." Sarah paused. "But you'll know what you are. Men who chose survival over change. Outlaws who had the chance to become something better and decided comfort was more important than growth." The challenge landed differently than expected, not as a threat but as a mirror, reflecting back the image of who they were and asking whether that image was something they could live with. Kane turned to the assembled brotherhood. 43 faces, some angry, some scared, some carrying the particular resignation of people who'd been through too much to believe in clean endings. "She's offering us a choice," Kane said, his voice carrying through the mill's acoustics. "Voluntary reformation with federal oversight, or walk away clean and stay exactly what we've always been." "That's not a choice," Wrench called from the back. "That's an ultimatum dressed up as democracy." "Maybe, but it's the only offer on the table." Kane looked at Mac, then at Ava, still held in her brother's arms on the workbench, then at Sarah, standing alone against a brick wall with her go-bag at her feet, and 8 years of undercover work balanced on whatever happened in the next 5 minutes. "I'll go first," Kane said. "I vote yes. Reformation, transparency, whatever it costs." He paused. "Because I'm tired of being the villain in everyone's story, including my own." Trigger stepped forward. "Yes." Mama Jean from Wrench's side. "Yes." Jinx. "Yes." Nick, voice barely audible. "Yes." One by one they voted. Not unanimously, 7 members voted no, and 2 abstained, but with enough consensus that the result was unambiguous. 34-7. The Steelhawks would reform. Sarah's phone rang again. She looked at the screen and Max saw her face change, the tactical alertness sharpening into something closer to alarm. "My handler," she said. "He knows I'm here. He's got a team moving on this location." "How long?" Trigger asked. "Minutes, not more." Mac looked at the Brotherhood, at Ava, at Liam, at Sarah, and made the last unilateral decision of his outlaw career. "Sarah, you said your handler's operation is unauthorized, that he's been running this off books using government resources for personal reasons." "Yes." "And the evidence is in Storage Unit 47 on Route 12. Everything, emails, financial records, communication logs that prove he diverted federal funds and personnel without authorization." "Then we don't run." Mac's voice carried the weight of someone who'd finally found the intersection between courage and strategy. "We don't hide. We don't scatter." He turned to Nick. "Call every media contact you have, newspapers, TV stations, online outlets. Tell them to get cameras to the old mill on River Road immediately. Tell them there's a story about federal overreach and outlaw redemption, and they've got 15 minutes to be part of it. Mac, Kane started. Trust me. Mac met his eyes. For once in our history, let the Steelhawks fight with truth instead of fists. Nick made the calls. 4 outlets picked up, 2 dispatched camera crews. Sarah, Mac continued, I need you to do something you've never done in 8 years of undercover work. What? Tell the truth, on camera, about your handler, about the unauthorized operation, about everything. Sarah's face went pale. If I do that, I'm finished. Career over. Identity exposed. Everything I've built. Everything you've built is a lie. Mac's voice was gentle but unsparing. You told me earlier that you needed this to mean something. Here's your chance. Make it mean something real, not prosecution, not punishment, transformation. You're asking me to destroy myself. I'm asking you to stop hiding, the same thing I should have asked you 20 years ago. Sirens. Distant but approaching. The handler's team moving fast, closing the gap between here and intervention. Ava's voice, small but clear, cut through the sirens and the tension and the impossible weight of everything happening at once. Do it. Everyone turned toward the workbench where she sat beside her brother, looking at Sarah with eyes that held no anger, no resentment, just the fierce clarity of someone who'd spent her life trapped and understood exactly what it meant to choose freedom over safety. You took me from my bed, Ava said. You scared me. You used me as a bargaining chip. Her voice didn't waver. But you also fed me. You gave me my medication. You sat with me when I couldn't sleep and told me about the person you used to be before you burned your life down. Sarah's composure cracked, visibly, like watching a dam develop fractures too numerous to repair. You told me you missed being someone who didn't have to lie every single day, Ava continued, that you missed being ordinary, that you missed being known. She paused. This is your chance to be known, not as an agent, not as a weapon, just as a person who made mistakes and decided to stop running from them. The sirens were closer now, 2 minutes, maybe less. Sarah looked at Mac, at Kane, at the brotherhood assembled around her like a jury that had somehow become an audience, that had somehow become something resembling family. I need the storage unit evidence, she said. Without it, my testimony is just words. Trigger, Mac said. Route 12, Unit 47, go. Trigger was through the mill door and on his Harley before Mac finished the sentence, engine roaring to life and tires spraying gravel as he tore out of the parking lot heading north. He'll make it, Mac said, though he wasn't sure. We just need to hold this space long enough for the cameras to arrive. The first news van pulled into the parking lot at 12:47 p.m. A reporter and cameraman from Channel 9 Millbrook, looking confused and excited in equal measure. The federal vehicles arrived at 12:49. 3 black SUVs, 8 men in tactical gear, and 1 man in a gray suit who stepped out of the lead vehicle with the controlled fury of someone watching his life's work unravel in real time. Handler David Marsh, 54 years old, career federal prosecutor turned rogue operator, running an unauthorized long game against motorcycle clubs using diverted government resources and the devotion of an undercover agent he'd manipulated into becoming his personal weapon of institutional revenge. He saw the cameras and stopped walking. He saw Sarah standing beside Mac at the mill entrance, and his expression shifted from fury to something more dangerous, the calculating reassessment of a man who'd been outmaneuvered and was already building his next move. Agent Delaney, Marsh said, using Sarah's operational name. Step away from the subjects. No, Sarah said, and the single word carried the weight of 8 years of obedience being shed like dead skin. That's a direct order. From an unauthorized operation using diverted federal resources. Sarah's voice rose enough for the cameras to catch every word. An operation you've been running off books since 2023 without departmental approval, using my undercover status as cover for your personal vendetta. Marsh's face went white. Shut up. An operation that targeted civilian miners as leverage. Sarah gestured toward Ava and Liam, ensuring the camera tracked the motion. including a 13-year-old girl with a terminal diagnosis who was removed from protective custody without judicial authorization. I said shut up. You don't get to tell me to shut up anymore. Sarah's voice cracked on the last word, and Max saw tears falling down her face for the first time in 8 years. Not weakness, but release. The particular relief of someone who'd been holding a door shut against a flood and finally decided to step aside and let it come. Trigger's Harley roared into the parking lot. He dismounted, pulled a waterproof document case from his saddlebag, and walked it directly to the Channel 9 reporter with the calm efficiency of someone delivering a verdict. Federal documents, Trigger said, showing unauthorized use of government resources for a personal prosecution agenda. Everything's dated and verified. The reporter's eyes went wide. She signaled her cameraman. A second news van arrived. Marsh looked at the cameras, at the documents, at Sarah standing beside the motorcycle club she'd spent 8 years trying to destroy, crying and defiant and more real than she'd been since the night she'd set fire to her own life. And he knew it was over. Not because of the evidence. Evidence could be contested, denied, buried in legal procedure. But because the story was already forming in real time, captured on camera, witnessed by journalists who would file their reports before his legal team could even draft a response. A rogue federal prosecutor. An undercover agent turned whistleblower. A motorcycle club choosing reformation over retaliation. And a dying girl at the center of it all, sitting on a dusty workbench in an abandoned mill, holding her brother's hand while the adults around her finally chose truth over power. Max stood between Sarah and Marsh, facing the man who'd orchestrated 8 years of destruction with the quiet certainty of someone who'd found something worth standing for. "It's done," Max said. "Whatever you had, it's gone. Walk away." "You have no idea what you've started," Marsh said through clenched teeth. "I know exactly what I've started." Mac looked back at the mill, at Kane standing in the doorway with his scarred hands and his broken authority and his willingness to rebuild. At Mama Jean with her arms crossed and her tears falling freely. At Nick with his guilt and his laptop and his dying sister who might still be saved by the right kind of courage. At Ava and Liam holding each other on the workbench like two survivors on a life raft, waiting to see if the storm would pass or swallow them whole. "I've started the end," Max said, "of everything we were and everything we should have been, and never had the courage to become." Marsh looked at the cameras one last time, then got back in his SUV. His team followed. They drove away in silence, and in the parking lot of an abandoned mill on the Millbrook River, surrounded by 43 bikers and 2 news crews, and one woman who'd come back from the dead to destroy them and ended up saving them instead, Ava Mercer leaned against her brother's shoulder, closed her eyes, and whispered 4 words that nobody heard except Liam. "I want to ride." The cameras kept rolling for 47 minutes after Marsh's convoy disappeared down River Road, capturing footage that would eventually air on 6 regional news stations and accumulate 11 million views across social media platforms within 72 hours. But none of that mattered yet. What mattered was the silence that settled over the mill parking lot after the last SUV vanished around the bend. A silence so complete it felt like the world had paused to take inventory of what had just happened and hadn't yet decided whether to categorize it as victory or catastrophe. Max stood in the cold December air watching the empty road and feeling nothing. Not relief, not triumph, not the cathartic release that movies promised when the villain retreated and the good guys remained standing. Just a vast, numb emptiness that came from spending the last 48 hours running on adrenaline and fear and discovering that when those fuels finally burned out, what remained underneath was a 63-year-old man with a dislocated shoulder and the shattered remnants of a life he'd never adequately lived. Sarah sat on the mill's loading dock 15 feet away, legs dangling over the edge like a teenager, her go-bag beside her, and her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that Mama Jean had produced from somewhere, because Mama Jean always produced coffee from somewhere, even at the end of the world, even in an abandoned mill, even for the woman who'd tried to destroy everything she'd spent 37 years building. That was the thing about Mama Jean that nobody ever talked about. She didn't forgive through words or gestures or grand emotional declarations. She forgave through coffee, through warm rolls, through the quiet insistence that human beings needed to be fed regardless of what they'd done, because hunger was the one injustice she could fix immediately and without committee approval. "Thank you," Sarah said when Mama Jean handed her the cup. Mama Jean didn't respond, just walked back inside the mill where Ava was sleeping on a pile of moving blankets that Wrench had pulled from his truck. Liam curled beside her like a parenthesis around the most important sentence he'd ever protect. Inside the mill, the Steelhawks were doing what bikers always did after crisis: smoking, pacing, speaking in low voices about logistics and next steps while avoiding the emotional crater at the center of everything. Kane had positioned himself near the far wall, phone pressed to his ear, having the first of what would become dozens of conversations with lawyers, journalists, and federal officials over the coming weeks. His voice carried the flat exhaustion of a man who'd surrendered control and was discovering that freedom from authority felt less like liberation and more like vertigo. Trigger sat on an overturned crate near the entrance, prosthetic leg extended, cleaning his reading glasses with methodical precision. He'd made the run to the storage unit and back in 14 minutes, a personal record on roads he'd been riding for 20 years. And the evidence he'd delivered had detonated Marsh's operation with the surgical efficiency of a man who understood that timing was everything, and everything was timing. Nick hunched over his laptop in a corner, already drafting the framework for the club's voluntary reformation agreement. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the frantic energy of someone channeling guilt into productivity, each line of text a small act of atonement for the federal deal he'd made in desperation. His sister's medical bills still waited in his inbox like a wound that wouldn't close, but somewhere between the quarry and the mill, he'd decided that solving one crisis at a time was the only sustainable approach to a life built on accumulated emergencies. "Nick," Mac's voice from the doorway. Nick looked up, fingers pausing. "Your sister. The cancer treatment." "Yeah? How much?" Nick's jaw tightened. $347,000 after insurance, give or take. Mac nodded slowly. "The media's going to pick this story up. Donations will come in. They always do when bikers do something the public finds unexpectedly noble. When that money arrives, your sister's treatment comes first." "Mac, I can't." "You can, and you will, because your sister didn't choose any of this, same as Ava didn't choose any of this. The people who had no say in our decisions deserve to be made whole before anyone else." Nick stared at his screen for a long moment, then nodded once without speaking, because some forms of gratitude are too heavy for words, and the only honest response is silence. The afternoon dissolved into logistics. Federal investigators arrived at 3 p.m., not Marsh's team, but a separate division dispatched from Washington after the news coverage triggered an internal review. They interviewed Sarah for 4 hours in a room the Steelhawks cleared and furnished with folding chairs and a card table. They spoke with Kane for 90 minutes. They took statements from Mac, Trigger, and Nick. They photographed the storage unit documents and initiated a formal investigation into Handler Marsh's unauthorized operation that would eventually result in his indictment on 12 counts of misuse of government resources and 3 counts of witness intimidation. Sarah cooperated fully, not as an agent following protocol, but as a civilian providing testimony, a distinction that carried legal significance and personal weight in roughly equal measure. When the investigators asked about her undercover methodology, she answered with clinical precision. When they asked about her emotional state during the operation, she looked at the table and said, "I was surviving. That's not the same as living, but I didn't know the difference until today." Mac listened from the doorway, arms crossed, shoulder throbbing beneath the wrap Mama Jean had applied. He'd spent 8 years grieving a woman who'd been alive and working 3 states away, building a case against everything he represented. The grief hadn't been wasted. It had changed him in ways that made today possible, but it had been unnecessary, and the waste of it sat in his chest like a stone he'd never fully dissolve. When the investigators finished with Sarah, she found Mac outside the mill, leaning against his Harley in the fading December light. "They're recommending witness protection," she said. "New identity, new city, again. Is that what you want?" Sarah looked at the sky, gray and vast and carrying the weight of winter clouds that might deliver snow or might just hover indefinitely, undecided. "I've been someone else for 8 years. I don't even know who Sarah Delaney is anymore. Maybe she died in that fire after all." "She didn't." Mac's voice carried certainty he hadn't felt about anything in decades. She's standing right here, talking to the man who should have fought harder to keep her. Mac, I'm not asking you to come back. I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance or any of the other things men ask for when they realize too late what they've lost. He turned to face her directly. I'm telling you that the woman I married, the one who sat in that kitchen with Mama Jean every Friday night and dreamed about a life bigger than what I offered her, that woman was extraordinary. And whatever she became afterward, whatever she had to do to survive, doesn't erase who she was. Sarah's eyes glistened. You make it sound simple. Nothing about us was ever simple, but some things are true even when they're complicated. They stood together in the cold until the sky turned indigo and the first stars appeared, not touching, not reconciling, just occupying the same space for the first time in 8 years and discovering that proximity didn't have to mean resolution. Sometimes two people could simply stand side by side and acknowledge the wreckage between them without pretending it could be rebuilt. I'm going to take the protection offer, Sarah said finally. Not because I'm afraid, because I need time to figure out who I am when I'm not hiding or hunting. That sounds right. Mac? She turned to look at him one last time. The girl. Ava. What you and the club did for her, building that scooter, protecting her, choosing her over everything, that's the version of you I always believed existed. I just couldn't find it underneath the leather and the loyalty and the noise. Maybe I couldn't either, Mac said. Until she showed up. Sarah nodded, then walked to the sedan, got in, and drove away without looking back. Mac watched her taillights shrink to red dots and then disappear entirely, and when the darkness swallowed the last trace of her, he finally exhaled. The sound that came out of him wasn't quite crying. It was closer to the noise a structure makes when the load it's been carrying for decades is finally removed, a deep, groaning release that contained relief and grief and the strange, hollow peace of letting go. He stood there for another 5 minutes, then went inside to check on Ava. She was awake. Sitting up on the moving blankets with Liam beside her, both of them eating sandwiches that Mama Jean had assembled from supplies in Spider's truck. The mill's interior glowed with portable work lights that Trigger had set up, casting warm pools of illumination that made the abandoned industrial space feel almost domestic. You okay? Mac asked, crouching beside her. Define okay. Ava's voice carried the dry humor of someone who'd learned that laughing at impossible situations was the only rational response. I was kidnapped by your ex-wife, used as a bargaining chip in a federal operation, and rescued by a motorcycle club that's currently being investigated by the government. So my bar for okay is pretty flexible right now. Mac almost smiled. Fair enough. Is she gone, Sarah? Yeah. Good. Ava paused. And also sad. She wasn't what I expected. When she sat with me in that motel room, she told me about her life before the fire, before all of this. She said she used to garden, roses, that she won a county fair ribbon once for her hybrid tea roses, and it was the proudest she'd ever been. Mac's throat tightened. He remembered the garden, the roses, the ribbon she'd hung on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a motorcycle, a gift he'd bought her as a joke that she'd kept for 12 years because it was the only time he'd acknowledged her world instead of expecting her to orbit his. She was a good person, Mac said quietly. Before I made her feel like being good wasn't enough. She's still a good person, Ava corrected. Good people do bad things when they run out of better options. Isn't that basically the story of everyone in this room? Mac looked around the mill at the assembled steelhawks. Scarred men and weathered women who'd spent their lives making terrible decisions for complicated reasons and somehow ended up here, in this moment, choosing a dying girl over their own survival. Yeah, he said. I guess it is. The Reformation began 3 days later. Kane stepped down as president, not expelled, not stripped of his patch, but voluntarily surrendering the authority he'd wielded for 7 years in recognition that leadership built on secrecy couldn't sustain the transparency the club had committed to. The vote for his replacement was unanimous. Mac Delaney, who accepted the position with the specific condition that every major decision would be put to full membership vote and that the club's primary mission would shift from self-preservation to community service. We've been surviving for 40 years, Mac told the assembled brotherhood during his first address as president. Starting now, we learn how to live. The federal oversight agreement took 2 weeks to finalize. 5 years of open books, quarterly audits, mandatory community engagement, and a complete prohibition on any activity that couldn't withstand public scrutiny. Some members left, 7 full-patch riders who couldn't accept the constraints and walked away with their leather and their resentment and the particular bitterness of men who'd confused rigidity with strength. The rest stayed. Not because they were comfortable with the changes, but because they'd seen what the Steelhawks could be when they chose to build, instead of just endure. They'd seen it in Ava's face when she rode that scooter for the first time. They'd seen it in Liam's transformation from a starving kid stealing parts to a young man who understood that asking for help wasn't weakness. And they'd seen it in themselves, reflected back through the eyes of 2 children who'd looked at dangerous men and found safety instead of fear. The media coverage did exactly what Mac predicted. 6 regional news stations ran the story. National outlets picked it up within a week. The narrative was irresistible. Outlaw bikers reform to protect dying child, expose federal corruption, choose transparency over tradition. Donations poured into the clubhouse from across the country. Other motorcycle clubs reached out, initially skeptical, then cautiously supportive as the Steelhawks' reformation proved sustainable rather than performative. Nick's sister started treatment in January. The experimental protocol cost $347,000. The Steelhawks covered every cent from donated funds, with enough left over to establish a permanent medical assistance fund for members' families. Nick earned his full patch the same week his sister's oncologist reported the tumors were responding. He didn't celebrate. He sat in the clubhouse garage at 2 a.m., staring at the workbench where Ava's scooter had been built, and cried for 30 minutes straight, not from relief, but from the accumulated weight of everything he'd carried and everything he'd almost lost, and the strange, disorienting gratitude of a man who'd been given a second chance he knew he didn't deserve. Kane's daughter called on Christmas morning. Not a voicemail, not a text, a real call. 27 minutes of halting conversation between a father who'd spent years choosing duty over presence and a daughter who'd spent those same years learning to be whole without him. They didn't resolve anything. They didn't reconcile or forgive or make promises that either of them knew they couldn't keep. They just talked. About the news coverage, about Marcus, who'd been offered a legitimate position at a motorcycle repair shop the Steelhawks were opening as part of their community engagement program. About the weather in Baltimore where Emma was finishing her master's degree in social work, a career choice that Kane recognized with painful clarity had been shaped by growing up watching her father fail to help the people closest to him. "I saw the videos," Emma said near the end of the call. "The girl on the scooter, the ride through town. Yeah, that was you? Your club? That was all of us. But mostly a kid named Liam who loved his sister enough to steal motorcycle parts from dangerous men." Emma laughed, a sound Kane hadn't heard in 3 years and had forgotten could affect him so physically. It landed in his chest like a fist made of something warm. "Come visit," she said. "Not for the club, not for business, just for pancakes." Pancakes. I make really good pancakes now. Kane closed his eyes. "I'd like that." "Saturday?" "Saturday." He hung up and sat in his truck in the clubhouse parking lot for 20 minutes, engine running, heater blasting, watching snow fall through the windshield and feeling something inside him shift. Not dramatically, not like a revelation or a breakthrough, but slowly, the way ice melts when the temperature rises just enough. Not a flood. A thaw. Spring came early that year, March instead of April, the ground softening and the trees budding with the tentative optimism of things that had survived a hard winter and were cautiously testing whether it was safe to grow again. Ava's scooter sat in the clubhouse garage, maintained and polished by bikers who treated it with the reverent care normally reserved for vintage Harleys. Liam had added modifications over the winter, a phone mount, a better suspension system, a small storage compartment that Mama Jean had suggested for carrying medication. The blood-red flames still blazed along the side panels, undimmed by weather or time, and Ava's name still gleamed in crimson thread across the custom seat. She rode it every day the weather allowed, sometimes alone, cruising the residential streets near the apartment the Steelhawks had helped her and Liam secure, moving at 15 miles per hour with the wind in her hair and the particular expression of someone who'd learned to measure joy not in duration but in intensity. Sometimes with an escort, 2 or 3 bikers flanking her on their Harleys, engines rumbling in counterpoint to the electric motor's hum, drawing stares and phone cameras from pedestrians who recognized the girl from the news and wanted to capture the image of a child leading giants. The neurologist's prognosis hadn't changed. The disease was still progressive, still degenerative, still following the timeline that medical science could predict but couldn't alter. Ava's strength fluctuated, good days when she could ride for an hour, bad days when transferring from wheelchair to scooter took more energy than she had. But she never stopped riding, never stopped showing up at the clubhouse after school to work on the scooter with Liam or sit in the garage watching Mac weld, learning the particular patience of metal heated and shaped and cooled into something stronger than its original form. "How long do I have?" she asked Mac one evening in April, sitting beside him on the garage floor while spring rain hammered the roof and the smell of wet concrete mixed with motor oil. Mac set down his torch. "The doctors say—" "I know what the doctors say. I'm asking you." He looked at her. This kid who'd been through kidnapping and federal investigations and motorcycle rides through winter streets and the particular cruelty of a body that was slowly betraying its occupant, and gave her the only answer that mattered. Long enough to matter. "That's vague." "Life's vague. Doesn't mean it's not worth showing up for." Ava considered this. Then, "Mac, when I can't ride anymore, when the disease takes that away too, will you keep the scooter?" "I'll keep it. And ride it sometimes, so it doesn't forget what it feels like to move." Mac's throat closed. He worked it open through sheer force of will. "Every week, rain or shine. Promise?" "Promise." She leaned against his shoulder, this tiny, fragile, impossibly brave girl who taught an entire motorcycle club what it meant to be strong, and they sat together listening to the rain and the distant sound of highway traffic, and the particular silence that exists between people who've stopped pretending the future is guaranteed and learned instead to occupy the present with everything they have. On a Saturday in late May, the Steelhawks organized a ride. Not a protest run or a charity event or a show of force designed to intimidate or impress. Just a ride. 67 motorcycles, the original 43 members plus 24 riders from other clubs who'd been inspired by the Steelhawks Reformation and wanted to demonstrate solidarity. They gathered in the clubhouse parking lot at dawn, engines idling, leather creaking, coffee steam rising into air that smelled like cut grass and gasoline and the kind of possibility that only exists on mornings when the world decides to cooperate. Ava sat at the front on her scooter, wearing a custom leather jacket that Jinx had hand-painted with flame details matching the scooter's body panels. Liam stood beside her, no longer the starving kid in duct-tape sneakers, but a 15-year-old with calloused hands and steady eyes, and the quiet confidence of someone who'd built something worth protecting with his own scarred fingers. Mac rode to Ava's left, Kane to her right, Trigger and Nick behind. Mama Jean in Wrench's sidecar with her thermos of coffee and her expression of fierce, unyielding love. Jinx and Spider and the rest of the Brotherhood fanning out in formation like a flock of dangerous, devoted, imperfect guardians who'd finally remembered what they were supposed to be. "Ready?" Mac called over the engine noise. Ava twisted the throttle. The electric motor hummed to life. "Born ready," she said, and grinned like someone who'd stared down every nightmare the world could throw at her and decided to smile anyway. They pulled onto the highway as the sun cleared the tree line. 67 motorcycles and one custom scooter moving through golden morning light, engines shaking the air, chrome catching sunbeams, the sound of their passing rolling across Millbrook like thunder from a storm that had decided to protect instead of destroy. Ava led the way, not because she was the fastest or the strongest or the most experienced, but because she was the reason all of this existed, the catalyst that had turned a junkyard theft into a brotherhood's redemption, a dying girl's fear into a community's purpose, a rusted chain-link fence into the first step of a journey that none of them had expected and all of them needed. Cars pulled over. People stood on sidewalks and porches, filming and waving, and some of them crying without quite understanding why. A group of kids outside a convenience store cheered and pumped their fists. An old man in a lawn chair raised his coffee mug in salute. And Ava rode. She rode past the intersection of Main and 7th, where a black Escalade had almost ended everything. She rode past the elementary school and the strip malls and the industrial east side where the clubhouse sat like a scar that had learned to become a shelter. She rode past the dead-end streets and the empty lots and the particular sadness of a steel town that had forgotten how to make things until a 14-year-old boy reminded everyone that creation was still possible. Wind tore through her hair, the electric motor sang beneath her hands. And behind her, 67 engines roared in unison, not leading, not following, but accompanying, walking beside her through whatever time she had left with the fierce, broken, beautiful loyalty of people who understood that protecting someone didn't mean shielding them from life. It meant riding with them through it. Later that night, after the engines cooled and the bikers dispersed and the clubhouse settled into its familiar symphony of coffee and cigarette smoke and the creaking of old leather, Mac hung a new photograph on the garage wall beside the original. Ava at the front of 67 motorcycles, spring sunlight blazing off her chrome handlebars, blood-red flames racing along the scooter's body panels, and her face showing something that no diagnosis could diminish and no disease could steal. Joy. Pure and defiant and completely, stubbornly alive. Liam found him staring at it around midnight. "She had a good day," Liam said quietly. "She did. She won't have many more like it." "No." Mac turned to face the kid who'd started all of this by climbing a fence in the dark, with trembling hands and a half-eaten sandwich and hope so fierce it scared him. "But she had this one, and every person who rode with her today will carry it for the rest of their lives." Liam nodded, then did something he'd never done before. Stepped forward and hugged Mac with the complete, unguarded trust of a child who'd finally found the family he'd been building toward since the night his mother disappeared and left him responsible for a world too heavy for 14-year-old shoulders. Mac held him, didn't speak, didn't offer wisdom or comfort or the kind of hollow reassurance that adults dispensed when they didn't know what else to do. Just held this boy in the garage where they'd built something beautiful together and let the silence say everything that words couldn't. Outside, a single Harley rumbled to life in the parking lot. Trigger. Heading home after a long day, the sound of his engine fading down the highway like a heartbeat growing distant but never quite disappearing. Inside, the photographs hung on the wall, Ava grinning at the front of 50 motorcycles in December, Ava grinning at the front of 67 motorcycles in May. 2 moments frozen in time. 2 declarations that a dying girl had made to a world that kept trying to count her out. The Steelhawks had finally remembered what they were supposed to be. Not outlaws, not criminals, not the dangerous men that society crossed the street to avoid. Guardians. Imperfect, scarred, broken human beings who'd spent decades running from their own failures and finally found something worth stopping for. Not a cause or a mission or a noble purpose wrapped in leather and chrome. Just 2 kids who needed help. Just a sister who needed to fly. Just the simple, devastating, extraordinary act of showing up for someone else when the world said it wasn't your problem. Mac turned off the garage lights. The photographs disappeared into darkness. But the images remained, burned into the walls, into the concrete, into the collective memory of a brotherhood that had been remade by the smallest, bravest person any of them had ever known. He locked the clubhouse door, mounted his Harley, and rode home through empty streets beneath a sky full of stars that looked close enough to touch, if you were moving fast enough and brave enough and willing to believe that reaching for impossible things was the whole point of being alive. The engine rumbled beneath him like a second heartbeat. The road stretched ahead, dark and open and full of the kind of silence that doesn't mean emptiness, but possibility. And somewhere behind him, in a small apartment above a hardware store on the east side of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, a 13-year-old girl slept beside her brother with a custom leather jacket draped over her shoulders and a smile on her face that even sleep couldn't erase, dreaming of highways and chrome and wine and the sound of 50 engines carrying her forward into whatever came next. Not behind anyone, not being pushed, leading, always leading.